If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The first body I found was hanging 30 feet up in the air, no rope, no wires, just floating there like someone had pressed pause while it was falling. I've worked in White Mountain National Forest for 15 years, and I've seen my share of strange things, bears in places they shouldn't be, unexplained lights in the darkness, and weather that changes faster than a kid changing their mind about ice cream flavors. But this was different. My name is Beth Sullivan, and this is the story of what happened in what we now call the Hanging Wood. I need to warn you, though. Some nights I still wake up covering my ears, trying to block out sounds that aren't there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on a cold October morning, the kind where your breath makes little clouds in front of your face and the leaves crunch under your boots like nature's bubble wrap. I was doing my usual patrol, checking the trails after a storm had blown through the night before. The trees seemed taller than usual that day, their tops disappearing into a thick morning fog that just wouldn't lift. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you usually get in the woods. This was different. Wrong. You know how there's always some sound in a forest? Birds chirping, leaves rustling, squirrels scampering around. Not here. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the whole world. Then I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, something dark was floating in the air. At first, I thought it was a trash bag caught in the branches. We get those sometimes when careless campers leave their garbage behind. But when I got closer, my stomach did a flip that had nothing to do with the coffee I'd had for breakfast. It was Mr. Johnson, one of our regular hikers. He was just hanging there, his arms spread out like he was trying to hug the sky. His face was frozen in an expression I'll never forget. Pure terror, like he'd seen something so horrible his face got stuck that way. I reached for my radio to call it in, but all I got was static. Not the normal kind of static either. It had a pattern to it, almost like it was trying to form words. I switched it off quickly because something about that sound made my teeth hurt and my head spin. That's when I heard it. A sound so low I felt it more than heard it. Like the rumble you feel in your chest when you stand too close to a huge speaker at a concert, but deeper, much deeper. The trees around me started to vibrate, and I swear I saw waves in the air like heat waves on a hot summer road, but it was barely 40 degrees out. I've spent years studying sounds. It was my job before I became a forest ranger. I used to design concert halls and recording studios, making sure the acoustics were perfect. But these sound waves I was seeing, they weren't natural. They were forming patterns in the air, shapes that looked almost like letters from some alphabet I'd never seen before. As I stood there, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over that deep rumble, I noticed something else. Small birds were falling from the sky, just dropping straight down, like their wings had suddenly stopped working. They hit the ground with soft thuds, their tiny bodies already stiff, like they died mid-flight. I knew I should leave. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't, not yet, because as I looked up at Mr. Johnson's body, I realized something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't the only one. Through the gaps in the trees, I could see more dark shapes hanging in the air, scattered throughout the forest, like some twisted Christmas decoration display. That was the day I first understood that something was terribly wrong in our forest. Something that defied everything I knew about physics, about sound, about reality itself. And as I stood there, watching those shapes in the fog, I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change everything I thought. I knew about our world. Looking back now, I wish I had run away that day. But I didn't. Instead, I took out my phone and started taking pictures, trying to document what I was seeing. The photos would later show nothing but blur and static, as if whatever was out there didn't want to be recorded. But I was already in too deep, already part of whatever was happening in these woods. And somewhere high above in the fog-covered treetops, something was watching. Something that could bend sound and gravity to its will. Something that would soon make me wish I'd never set foot in what we now call the Hanging Wood. I guess I should tell you more about myself, because understanding who I am might help you understand why I didn't just walk away from all this. Most people would have quit their job and moved to another state after finding floating bodies in the woods. But I'm not most people. Before I became a forest ranger, I was what they call an acoustic engineer. Basically, I worked with sound for a living. I helped build music studios and concert halls, making sure the sound was perfect wherever you sat. My partner Sarah and I had our own company, and we were good at what we did. Really good. That was 3 years ago. Sarah and I were testing the sound in a new theater we'd built up in Maine when she disappeared. Just vanished. 1 minute, she was adjusting a microphone on stage, and the next, gone. The police searched for weeks. They found her backpack in the woods behind the theater, but that was it. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Just empty forest and a weird silence that seemed to swallow everything. After that, I couldn't stand being in theaters anymore. Every time I walked into one, I'd hear echoes that weren't there. So I switched careers and became a forest ranger. Weird choice, right? Moving to work in the very kind of place where Sarah vanished. But I had this feeling, call it gut instinct or whatever you want, that the answers I needed were out here in the wilderness. I brought my sound equipment with me, modified it to work in the forest. I've got these special microphones that can pick up sounds too low or too high for human ears. They're usually used for studying whales and bats, but I figured they might pick up something else. I also learned to read wind patterns, how they move through trees, how they carry sound. It's amazing what you can learn about what's happening in the forest just by listening properly. The other rangers think I'm a bit strange, always wearing my sound equipment and stopping to listen to things they can't hear. But they respect me because I'm good at my job. I found lost hikers by tracking their footsteps' echoes, spotted incoming storms before our weather equipment could catch them, and helped track down more than a few bears that were getting too close to camping grounds. But nothing in my experience, not the weird acoustics I'd studied, not the strange sounds I'd recorded in the wilderness, not even Sarah's disappearance, had prepared me for what I found that morning in the Hanging Wood. After calling in what I'd found, once my radio started working again, I went back to my cabin to get my special equipment. My hands were shaking, and I packed my bag, but not from fear. Okay, maybe a little from fear, but mostly it was excitement. For the first time since Sarah vanished, I felt like I was close to something real, something that might explain what happened to her. I packed my modified sound detectors, which look kind of like old-school headphones mixed with satellite dishes. Added my infrasound recorder. It's about the size of a lunchbox and picks up those super low sounds that you feel more than hear. Then I grabbed my tablet with its special software that turns sound waves into visual patterns. Last but not least, I took my old leather jacket, the one Sarah always said made me look like a movie detective. It seemed right somehow. Before I left, I looked at the photo of Sarah and me that sits on my desk. It was taken the day we opened our first big project, a concert hall in Boston. We're both grinning like kids on Christmas morning, our arms around each other's shoulders. I touched the frame gently like I always do. I think I'm onto something, Sarah, I whispered. Something big, and maybe, just maybe, it'll lead me to you. I didn't know it then, but I was right about one thing. I was definitely onto something. Big. But what I was about to discover in those woods was bigger and scarier than anything I could have imagined. And it all started with the strange sounds I picked up when I went back to investigate those floating bodies. When I got back to the Hanging Wood, things had changed. The police had arrived, and they'd managed to get Mr. Johnson's body down Don't ask me how. Nobody wanted to talk about it. One minute they were trying to figure out how to reach him, and the next minute he just dropped, like gravity suddenly. Remembered it had a job to do. I was setting up my equipment when two people approached me. The first was a tall man with grey hair and thick glasses who introduced himself as Dr. Richard Palmer. He said he studied strange creatures, a cryptozoologist. He called himself, though he quickly added, "I'm a real scientist, not one of those Bigfoot hunters you see on TV." The second person was Technical Sergeant Mike Torres from the nearby military base. He was younger than Dr. Palmer, probably in his 30s, with the kind of serious face that made you think he'd seen things he wished he hadn't. He specialized in sound weapons, things that could hurt people just using sound waves. I didn't even know that was a thing before meeting him. "Those patterns you saw in the air," Torres said, his voice low like he was sharing a secret. "I've seen something similar before, during a training exercise in the desert, but nothing quite like this." I set up my sound detector, putting on my headphones. At first there was nothing unusual, just the empty silence that still hung over everything. Then I heard it, a sound so low it made my stomach turn. "There's something," I started to say, but Dr. Palmer grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing up. High above us, something was moving through the treetops, not like a bird or a squirrel, more like how a shark moves through water. You couldn't see it clearly, just a sort of ripple in the air, like when heat rises from hot pavement. But this ripple was purposeful, searching. My equipment started going crazy. The tablet screen showed sound waves I'd never seen before. They looked almost like writing, but in a language that hurt my eyes to look at. Torres leaned over my shoulder, his face pale. "That's not possible," he muttered. "Those frequencies, they should be tearing us apart." Dr. Palmer was scribbling frantically in his notebook. "The local legends," he said, not looking up. "They talk about something in these woods, something that takes people. The stories go back hundreds of years, but nobody ever believed them because the details seemed impossible." "What details?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "A creature that flies without wings, that can make people float, that hunts using sound." He looked up at me. "That takes people without leaving a trace." My heart skipped a beat. "Like my partner Sarah." Before he could answer, we heard screaming from deeper in the woods. Not a human scream. It was a deer. We ran toward the sound, me still wearing my headphones, Torres with his hand on the gun at his hip. We found the deer in a small clearing. It was floating about 6 feet off the ground, spinning slowly like a toy in an invisible wind. The poor thing was alive and terrified, its legs kicking at nothing. Then my headphones picked it up, a sound like a song, but wrong somehow. Like someone had taken a beautiful piece of music and played it backwards and underwater. The deer went still, and I saw ripples in the air moving toward it. "Get down!" Torres yelled, pulling both Dr. Palmer and me behind a fallen tree. The sound got louder, and through my equipment I could see the waves becoming more intense, forming those strange symbols again. There was a horrible cracking noise, and when we looked up, the deer was gone, just gone. But small white things were falling from where it had been. I realized with horror they were bones, picked clean as if by invisible teeth. "It's intelligent," Dr. Palmer said, his voice shaking. "It's not just hunting, it's studying us, testing what it can do." Torres nodded grimly. "And getting bolder. The question is, why now? What's changed?" I didn't say anything, but I was thinking about Sarah, about all the missing persons reports I'd read about this area over the years, about the strange silence that seemed to follow this thing like a shadow. As we walked back to the ranger station, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Our footsteps didn't make any sound anymore. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, and somewhere above us, hidden in the ripples of the air, something was watching, learning, planning. We didn't know it then, but we had just started a countdown. In less than 48 hours, both Dr. Palmer and Sergeant Torres would be dead, and I would be face to face with something that should not exist. But for now, we were just three people trying to understand what we were dealing with, not realizing that it was already several steps ahead of us. Dr. Palmer was the first to die. We were testing a theory he had about the creature's hunting patterns. Looking back, we should have known better than to be out in the woods after dark. But we were all so caught up in trying to understand what we were dealing with. "Look at this," he'd said earlier that day, spreading a map across my desk. He'd marked every spot where bodies had been found, where hikers had gone missing, where my equipment had picked up those strange sounds. When you connected the dots, they made a spiral pattern, getting closer and closer to the center of the forest. Torres pointed to the center of the spiral. "What's here?" "Nothing," I said. "Just the oldest part of the forest. The trees there are ancient. Some of them were here before the first settlers arrived." "That's where we need to go," Dr. Palmer said, his eyes bright with excitement. "That's where it must live." I remember wanting to say no. The sun was already setting, and something in my gut was screaming that this was a bad idea. But then I thought about Sarah, about how she might have been taken to that same place, and I found myself nodding. We took my truck as far as we could, then walked the rest of the way. The silence in the woods was different now, heavier, like the air itself was thick with it. My equipment was picking up those low sounds again, but this time they had a pattern. To them, almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Palmer was in front, following the map with a flashlight. Torres was behind us, his special sound-blocking equipment humming softly. I was in the middle, watching the screen of my tablet as the sound waves got stronger and stronger. That's when I saw it. Not just a ripple this time, a shape. It was hovering between two ancient trees, and for a second my flashlight beam caught it. It looked almost human, but wrong. Its body was too long, its arms ending in something between fingers and wings. But its face, I'll never forget its face. It didn't have eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be, and a mouth that seemed to go all the way around its head. Dr. Palmer must have seen it too, because he stopped so suddenly I almost ran into him. "Fascinating," he whispered, reaching for his camera. "It's beautiful." Those were his last words. The creature's mouth opened all the way around, and the sound that came out. Have you ever heard feedback through a microphone? Imagine that, but 1,000,000 times worse, and somehow forming words that weren't words at all. My tablet screen exploded with patterns, and I felt my feet leaving the ground. Torres grabbed my jacket and pulled me back down, but Dr. Palmer, he just kept going up. 20 feet, 30 feet, his arms and legs spreading out like he was making a snow angel in the air. Then the sound changed, lower, deeper, the kind of sound that makes your bones vibrate. Dr. Palmer's body just crumpled, like someone had squeezed him like an empty soda can. He fell, hitting branches on the way down, and when he landed, I don't want to describe what he looked like. Let's just say the sound had done something horrible to him from the inside out. Torres fired his special sound weapon, something that was supposed to disrupt the creature's abilities. But it just turned its eyeless face toward us and made a sound that might have been laughter. "Run!" Torres shouted, pushing me ahead of him. "Get to the truck!" We ran. Oh, God, how we ran. But the woods had changed. The trees seemed to move. Paths that should have been there weren't, and that terrible sound followed us, getting closer and closer. My equipment was going crazy, showing sound patterns I'd never seen before. But in the chaos, something caught my eye. The patterns, they weren't random. They were repeating, like words in a sentence, like it was trying to talk to us. We made it back to the truck, but only because it let us. I know that now. It was studying us, learning about us, just like Dr. Palmer had said. And it had learned something from him, something about how to hurt us even worse. That night, after I got home, I couldn't stop shaking. I sat at my desk, playing back the recordings from my equipment, trying to make sense of those sound patterns. They reminded me of something from when Sarah disappeared. I pulled out her old files, the recordings from the theater the day she vanished. And there it was, buried in the background noise, the same patterns, the same not quite words. It hadn't just appeared in our forest. It had been around for a long time, moving from place to place, taking people. And now it had found a home in our woods. As I sat there, surrounded by my equipment and old files, the lights in my cabin flickered. Through my headphones, I heard that low, deep sound again. And even though I was inside, even though my doors were locked and windows shut, I felt a cold breeze on the back of my neck. It had followed me home. Torres came to my cabin early the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, and his hands were shaking as he placed a large metal case on my kitchen table. "I've called in every favor I could," he said, opening the case. "This is experimental stuff, sound weapons we've been developing. After what happened to Palmer..." He stopped, rubbing his face. "We can't let that thing take anyone else." Inside the case were what looked like oversized headphones and some devices that reminded me of the speakers you see at rock concerts, but smaller and covered in blinking lights. "These create a sound barrier," Torres explained, picking up one of the devices, "like an invisible wall made of sound waves. And these," he held up something that looked like a flashlight, "they shoot focused sound beams, like a sound laser." My hands were steady as I picked up the equipment. Maybe I should have been more scared after what happened to Dr. Palmer, but all I could think about was Sarah, about how she might have faced this thing alone. "I've been studying the recordings from last night," I told Torres, leading him to my desk where my computer was surrounded by coffee cups. "Look at this." I played the sound patterns we'd recorded, but slowed down, way down. And there it was. Hidden in the horrible noise was something like words. "It's trying to communicate," Torres said, leaning closer to listen. "But why? What does it want?" Before I could answer, all our equipment started going crazy. The lights flickered, and that now familiar deep sound filled the air. But this time it was different. This time I could almost understand it. "It's not just trying to communicate," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's trying to learn our language. Every time it kills, it's studying us. Learning how we make sounds, how we talk." Torres cursed under his breath. "We need to end this, now, before it learns enough to..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We both knew what he meant. Before it could spread, before it could teach others of its kind how to hunt us better. We spent the next few hours preparing. Torres taught me how to use the sound weapons, and I showed him how my recording equipment could track the creature's movements. We set up a plan. We'd use my knowledge of the forest and his military experience to trap it in. The ancient part of the woods, where we'd first seen it clearly. "These are the most important," Torres said, handing me what looked like normal earplugs. "They're special military gear. They don't just block sound. They can filter out the frequencies the creature uses to control gravity. Keep them in no matter what." As the sun started to set, we loaded everything into my truck. I took one last look at Sarah's picture on my desk. "We're going to need protective gear," Torres said, pulling out what looked like riot police uniforms from his car. "The sound waves it makes, they can tear you apart from the inside if you're not protected." As I put on the heavy vest and helmet, I noticed something odd. The usual forest sounds, the few that were left, had stopped completely. No birds, no insects, nothing. "It knows we're coming," I said. Torres nodded, checking his weapons one last time. "Good. Let it know. Let it think it's ready for us." But as we drove toward the hanging wood, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. The patterns in its sound, the way it had followed us, how it seemed to be learning. "Wait," I said, suddenly remembering something. The theater where Sarah disappeared. It had perfect acoustics. The forest where it lives now, the way the trees grow, creates natural sound chambers. What if it's not just using sound? Torres finished my thought. What if it needs these places to survive? We looked at each other as the same idea hit us both. Maybe we couldn't kill it, but maybe we could trap it. Change the acoustics of its hunting ground so it couldn't use its powers. We had a new plan now, a better one, but we were running out of time. As we parked at the edge of the woods, I saw those ripples in the air again, moving between the trees. It was waiting for us, and somewhere in those dark woods, I could have sworn I heard Sarah's voice, calling my name. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when Sarah's voice seemed to come from 3 different directions at once. But I was so desperate to find her, I almost ran straight into the woods. Torres grabbed my arm just in time. "It's using your memories," he said firmly, "like playing back a recording. Don't let it trick you." We moved carefully through the darkness, our sound equipment lighting up like Christmas trees with all the weird noises around us. The ripples in the air were everywhere now, making it look like we were underwater. Dead leaves and small branches floated up past our faces, like gravity had given up trying to work properly. Torres went first with his sound laser, sweeping it back and forth like a flashlight. I followed with my tablet, watching the sound patterns. We had speakers strapped to our backs, ready to create our sound barrier when needed. Then we heard it, a horrible mix of Sarah's laugh and that awful around-the-head mouth sound. Torres spun around, his weapon ready, but the creature was faster. It appeared right behind him, those wing-like arms spread wide. "Torres, duck!" I screamed, hitting the button on my speaker pack. A wall of sound blasted out, pushing the creature back. It screamed, a sound that made all our equipment spark and crackle. Torres fired his sound laser, hitting it square in what passed for its chest. The creature flickered like a bad TV signal, but it didn't fall. Instead, it opened its mouth, all the way around, and made a sound that turned my stomach inside out. I felt myself lifting off the ground. Torres, too. We were floating just like Mr. Johnson had been, just like all its victims. But we had our special earplugs in, the ones that blocked its gravity control powers. We dropped back down hard, but at least we weren't stuck in the air. "The trees!" I shouted over the noise. "We need to change how sound moves through here." Torres nodded and pulled out what looked like small silver balls from his pocket. "Sound grenades!" he yelled. "They'll shatter the sound patterns in the air." He threw them into the trees around us. They exploded with a weird popping noise, and suddenly all the ripples in the air started breaking up, like cracks in a glass window. The creature screamed again, but this time it sounded confused, scared. It tried to fly higher, but its movements were jerky, like it couldn't quite control itself anymore. That's when Torres got hit. The creature had picked up a fallen tree branch with its sound waves and threw it like a spear. It went right through his soundproof vest. I saw him fall, saw the blood, but there was no time to help him. "Beth," he gasped, pressing his sound laser into my hand. "Finish it, for Sarah." The creature was right above me now. Up close, I could see that its skin wasn't skin at all. It was like looking at sound waves made solid. And in those waves, I saw faces, dozens of faces. Sarah's face. Something in me snapped. All the fear turned into anger. This thing had taken Sarah, had taken so many people, had killed Palmer and now Torres. It had to end. I grabbed Torres's sound. Grenades with one hand and my speaker controls with the other. The creature dove at me, its mouth opening wide enough to swallow me whole. But I was ready. I threw the grenade straight into its mouth and hit the speakers at full blast, aiming the sound laser right at its center. The grenades exploded inside it. The sound was, I can't even describe it, like 1,000 car crashes, happening inside a thunderclap. The creature's body started breaking apart, those sound wave patterns shattering like glass. It tried to scream one last time, but the sound came out wrong, broken and weak. I saw something fall from its dissolving body, something that looked horribly like human bones. Then it just fell apart, like a sandcastle when a wave hits it. All those ripples in the air disappeared, and suddenly the forest was full of normal sounds again. Wind in the trees, birds waking up, insects buzzing. I ran to Torres, but I was too late. He was gone, but he died smiling. He knew we'd won. As I sat there in the early morning light, holding Torres's hand, I noticed something on my tablet screen. One last sound pattern fading away. When I played it back later, I finally understood what the creature had been trying to say all along. Not alone. There were more of them out there. Maybe not in our forest, but somewhere. Waiting, learning. And now they knew we could fight back. Picked up Torres's sound laser and my equipment. The sun was rising, turning the forest gold with morning light. Birds were singing again, and the trees looked normal. No more floating leaves or weird ripples in the air. But I knew this wasn't over. Not really. Somewhere out there, in other quiet places, in perfect acoustic spaces, they were waiting. And next time, I'd be ready. It's been 6 months since that night in the hanging wood. Sometimes I wake up thinking I can still hear that deep, horrible sound, but it's just the ringing in my ears, a permanent reminder of what happened. The doctors call it tinnitus. I call it my monster alarm. They gave Torres a hero's funeral. His family was told he died protecting the forest from a natural disaster. In a way, I guess that's true. Nature can be scary in ways we never imagined. The weird thing is, I can hear things now that most people can't. Really low sounds, the kind that rumble under everything else. Maybe it's because of what happened, or maybe I just learned to listen better. Either way, it's actually helped me with my job. I can hear storms coming hours before they hit, sense when animals are in trouble, know which parts of the forest to watch more carefully. I kept all the sound equipment Torres gave me, and I've been making my own additions to it. The military wanted it back, but after I told them there might be more creatures out there, they let me keep it. They even send me new gear sometimes, asking me to test it. Sarah's case is still open. I found some of her bones in that pile the creature left behind when it died. At least now, her family can have a proper funeral. At least now I know what happened to her, even if I can never tell anyone the whole truth. The hanging wood is different. Now, the trees are still tall, still ancient, but the silence there is normal forest silence, peaceful instead of scary. Birds nest there again, and hikers have started using the trails. Most people have forgotten about the strange deaths, or they blame them on bears or mountain lions. But sometimes, on really quiet nights, I take my equipment out there and listen. Listen for those deep sounds that shouldn't exist. Listen for ripples in the air that shouldn't be there, because I know the truth now. That creature wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, in other forests, in old theaters, in places with perfect acoustics, its kind is waiting, learning, getting ready. And when they come back, because I know they will come back, I'll be ready too. After all, I know their weakness now. I know how to fight them. And most importantly, I know how to listen for them. So that's why I'm telling you this story, because maybe you'll hear something strange one day. A sound that's not quite right. A silence that's too perfect. And maybe you'll remember my story and know what to do. Keep listening, stay alert, and if you ever hear a silence that feels wrong, run. I should have known something was wrong the moment the fog didn't lift at sunrise. In my 15 years of climbing these mountains, I'd never seen anything like it. The Great Smoky Mountains have their moods, sure, but this was different. The mist hung thick and heavy, like a wet blanket refusing to budge, even when the morning sun should have burned it away. My name is Catherine Martinez, Kate to everyone who knows me, and I've spent most of my life in these mountains. At 35, I'm one of the most experienced climbers and search and rescue specialists in the park. The mountains are my home, my safe place, Or at least they were until that cursed week in October when everything changed. I was doing my usual morning check at the ranger station when James, my partner, rushed in. His normally calm face was twisted with worry. Kate, we've got 3 separate missing persons reports, all within the last 24 hours. I grabbed my lucky carabiner from my desk, a habit I'd developed after the accident 2 years ago, the one where I couldn't save that young girl. No, I couldn't think about that now. Where were they last seen? I asked, pushing the memories. Away, that's the weird part, James said, spreading a map across my desk. All of them disappeared in different locations, but they all mentioned the same thing in their last contacts: strange fog. I walked to the window, staring at the wall of mist outside. Something about it made my skin crawl. Usually I can read weather patterns like most people read books. It's a skill that saved my life more times than I can count. But this fog, it was behaving all wrong. Look at this, I said, pointing outside. The fog was moving against the wind, swirling in patterns that defied nature. James stood beside me, his face reflecting the same unease I felt. We geared up and headed out to search for the missing hikers. The moment we stepped into the fog, my equipment started acting strange. My GPS flickered and died. The radio crackled with static. Even my watch seemed to be running slower than it should. James, I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the thick air. Check your phone. What time do you have? He pulled out his phone, frowning. That's impossible. It says we've been out here for 3 hours. We just left 20 minutes ago. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. As we pushed deeper into the forest, the fog grew thicker and shapes began to form in the mist. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then James saw them too, dark shadows moving just at the edge of vision, always disappearing. When we looked directly at them, we found the first sign of the missing hikers near Cherokee Burial Cave, a place I'd always avoided. The local Cherokee people had warned us about it, saying the cave held ancient spirits that should be left undisturbed. I never put much stock in ghost stories, but standing there that day, watching the unnatural fog curl around the cave entrance, I started to wonder if I should have listened more carefully. A backpack lay abandoned near the cave mouth, belonging to one of the missing hikers. Everything was intact: water bottle, snacks, even the wallet with cash still inside. No signs of animal attack or struggle. It was as if the owner had simply vanished into thin air. That's when we heard it, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. Like 1,000 whispers all at once, echoing through the valleys. But we couldn't make out the words. James grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "Kate," he whispered, "please tell me you hear that too." I nodded, unable to speak. The whispers grew louder, and with them came a feeling I'd never experienced in these mountains before. Pure, primal fear. Something was very wrong in my mountains, something that went against everything I knew about the natural world. As we stood there, frozen in place, my lucky carabiner suddenly grew ice cold against my hip. The fog around us began to move with purpose, forming shapes that looked almost intentional. Letters, maybe, or symbols I didn't recognize. "We need to get back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now!" But as we turned to leave, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't tell which direction we'd come from. The fog had closed in around us completely, and every direction looked the same. The shadows in the mist were moving more actively now, and I could have sworn I saw faces in them. Faces frozen in terror. That was the moment I realized the mountains I knew and loved had changed. Something ancient and evil had awakened in the Great Smokies, and those missing hikers were just the beginning. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that this was just the first hour of what would become the longest week of my life, a week that would test everything I thought I knew about reality, fear, and survival. A week that would change me forever. Little did I know, as James and I finally found our way back to the ranger station that afternoon, that the real horror was just beginning. And somewhere in that unnatural fog, something was watching us, learning about us, preparing to show us what true fear really means. It's been months since those events, and my hair has turned completely white. People ask me what happened up there in the mountains that week. I tell them it was stress or genetics or anything else they might believe. Because the truth is too terrifying for most people to handle. But I'm going to tell you everything. Now, every horrible detail, because someone needs to know the truth about what lurks in the midnight mist of the Great Smoky Mountains. And maybe, just maybe, this story will save your life one day. Just remember, if you're ever hiking in the Smokies and the fog starts moving wrong, run. Run as fast as you can. And whatever you do, don't look back at the shadows following. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadows in the fog. I kept checking my phone, but the time seemed wrong somehow. Sometimes 5 minutes would pass in what felt like an hour, and other times I'd blink and 30 minutes would disappear. The next morning, James and I met early at the ranger station. Dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't slept either. More missing persons reports had come in overnight. 2 more hikers and a local photographer. "We need help," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "This is bigger than us." James nodded and picked up his radio. "I'll call the state police." But when he tried, all we got was static. The phones weren't working either. Even the internet was down. That's when Margaret Walking Deer arrived at our station. She was a Cherokee elder I'd known for years, though we'd never talked much. She was one of those quiet, wise people who seemed to know things others didn't. Today, her usual calm face looked worried. "I saw the fog from my home," she said softly. "I was afraid this day would come." I pulled up a chair for her. "What do you mean, Margaret?" She sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving the window where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "Our people have stories," she said. "Old stories about something that sleeps in these mountains. Something that wakes up when it's hungry." James laughed nervously. "You mean like a bear?" Margaret's face stayed serious. "Bears don't make people vanish without a trace. Bears don't make time move wrong." She looked straight at me. "And bears don't follow you home in the shadows." A chill ran down my back. I hadn't told anyone about the shadow I thought I'd seen outside my window last night. "We need to search for those people," I said, trying to sound practical. "Whatever's happening, there are families waiting for answers." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in old leather. "Take this," she said, handing it to me. It was a small bundle of herbs tied with sinew. "It won't stop what's out there, but it might help you see it coming." I took it mostly to be polite. I'd never been one for superstition, but something about Margaret's fear felt real, too real. James and I geared up for another search. This time we took extra batteries, flares, and emergency supplies. "Stay within sight," I told him, "no matter what." The fog was even thicker than yesterday. It moved like water flowing around. Trees and rocks in ways that made my head hurt to watch. The herb bundle Margaret gave me felt warm in my pocket. We found the first body near Klingman's Dome. I've seen dead bodies before. It's part of search and rescue work. But this was different. The young man looked like he'd aged 50 years. Overnight, his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, but there wasn't a mark on him. "Kate!" James called out, his voice shaking. He was looking at the man's camera. The last photo showed something that made my stomach turn. A shape in the fog, too tall to be human, with too many angles that didn't make sense. That's when we heard the scream. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. James dropped the camera and grabbed my arm. That sounded like Sarah Chen, the photographer who went missing. We ran toward the sound, but the fog played tricks with distance. Sometimes it felt like we were running in place. Other times like we were moving too fast. The trees around us looked wrong, like they were bending away from something. The scream came again, closer this time. We burst into a small clearing and found Sarah's backpack. Her camera equipment was scattered around, and there were footprints in the dirt, running footprints that suddenly stopped in the middle of nowhere. James picked up her camera. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. He started flipping through the photos while I searched the area. That's when I heard him gasp, "Kate, you need to see this." The last photo on Sarah's camera showed a face in the fog, my face, but it wasn't really me. The eyes were wrong, empty somehow, and behind that false me, there was something else, something huge and dark with too many teeth. "We need to go," I said, but James was staring at something over my shoulder, his face going pale. I turned slowly. There, in the fog, was James. Another James, smiling at us with a smile that was too wide, too wrong. The real James grabbed my hand and squeezed. "Hit hard! Run!" he whispered. We ran. The fog tried to separate us, but I held onto James's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. Behind us, something laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. When we finally made it back to the ranger station, Margaret was waiting. She took one look at our faces and nodded sadly. "You've seen it now," she said. "The crawler, the shape stealer, the thing that feeds on fear." "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from running. "Something old," she said. "Something that was here long before my people came to these mountains. It sleeps for many years, then wakes up hungry. It takes shapes from our minds, the things we trust, the things we love, and uses them to hunt us." "How do we stop it?" James asked. Margaret's eyes were dark with worry. "There might be a way, but first you need to understand what you're really fighting. And that understanding..." She looked at both of us with deep sadness. "That understanding comes with a price." As if to prove her point, the lights in the station flickered and died. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, and in its swirling depths I saw faces. Dozens of faces, all wearing expressions of perfect terror. Night was falling, and with it came the horrible knowledge that our real fight was just beginning. Whatever this thing was, it had been playing with us so far, testing us, learning about us, and now it was ready to really begin its hunt. Margaret made us tea while we waited for morning. None of us wanted to sleep. The ranger station felt safe with its bright lights and solid walls, but we could all feel something, watching us from the fog outside. "Tell us everything you know," I said to Margaret, holding my warm cup with shaking hands. She settled into her chair, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "The stories say it comes every 50 years or so. My grandmother saw it when she was young. She was the only survivor of her group." James leaned forward. "What happened to her group?" "They went looking for missing children in the mountains. 7 people went up. Only my grandmother came back." Margaret's eyes grew distant. Her hair turned white overnight. She never told anyone exactly what she saw, but she warned us all to be ready for when it came back. The lights flickered again, and we all jumped. Outside, the fog pressed closer. "It feeds on fear," Margaret continued. "But not just any fear. It needs deep fear, real terror. That's why it takes its time. It learns what scares each person the most, then uses that against them." I thought about the false James we'd seen in the fog, about my own face in Sarah's camera. It copies people. It copies everything. People, voices, places you trust. It gets inside your mind and finds what makes you feel safe, then twists it. Margaret's voice grew heavy. "That's why the bodies look so strange. It doesn't just kill people. It frightens them to death, drains every drop of fear from them until there's nothing left." A loud bang made us all jump. Something had hit the window, hard. We rushed to look, but the fog was too thick to see anything. Then we heard James's voice from outside. "Help! Kate, help me!" The real James grabbed my arm. "Don't listen, I'm right here." The voice outside changed to sound like my mother, then like a crying child. Each voice hit something deep in my chest, making me want to run out and help. Margaret grabbed both our hands. "Listen carefully. There's a ritual that might stop it. My grandmother learned it from her grandmother, but it's dangerous if it doesn't work." She didn't finish the sentence. Before she could tell us more, all the lights went out at once. In the sudden darkness, I heard James scream. I fumbled for my flashlight. When I got it on, James was pressed against the wall, staring at something in the corner. But when I shined the light there, nothing was there. "I saw it," he whispered. "I saw what it really looks like." "James," I said firmly, "look at me. Whatever you saw, it wasn't real." But he just kept staring, his face getting paler by the second. It showed me that night, the night my brother—" I knew what he meant. James had lost his younger brother in these mountains when they were kids. He'd never forgiven himself for not finding him in time. "It's trying to separate us," Margaret said urgently. "You must stay together. It's stronger when people are alone." But James wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on something none of us could see, his breathing getting faster and faster. "Tommy," he whispered. "Tommy, I'm sorry." Then he ran for the door. "James, no!" I tried to grab him, but he was too fast. He yanked the door open and disappeared into the fog. I started to run after him, but Margaret's iron grip stopped me. "Wait, take these." She pressed a small bag into my hands. It was full of herbs like the ones she'd given me before, but these smelled stronger. "The ritual," she said quickly. "You need to trap it in its own fear. But first, you have to make it show its true form. The herbs will help you see through its illusions." But a scream cut through the night. James's scream. This time, I knew it was real. I ran out into the fog, Margaret's herbs clutched in my hand. The mist swirled around me, trying to lead me the wrong way, but somehow the herbs seemed to help me see through its tricks. I found James in a small clearing. He was on his knees, staring up at something I couldn't quite see. His face looked wrong, too old, too scared. "James!" I reached for him, but my hand went right through his shoulder. He felt cold as ice. Then he turned to look at me, and I saw his eyes were completely white. "Kate," he whispered, "I can see it now. I can see everything." Those were his last words. Right in front of me, James's body seemed to age decades in seconds. His skin dried up, his hair turned to dust, and then he was gone. Just gone, like he'd never been there at all. I heard something moving in the fog behind me, something big. When I turned around, I saw Margaret standing there, but I knew it wasn't really her. "Poor Kate," not Margaret said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Always trying to save everyone, just like that little girl 2 years ago. What was her name again? The one you couldn't reach in time." My blood ran cold. No one knew about that day except me. I'd never told anyone the details of how I'd failed to save that girl. The false Margaret's face began to melt, revealing something dark and horrible. Underneath, the herbs in my hand grew hot, burning away the creature's disguise. For just a second, I saw its true form. I wish I hadn't. I ran back to the station, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. But when I got there, I found the real Margaret surrounded by swirling fog, chanting words in Cherokee that made my ears hurt. "Kate!" she shouted when she saw me. "It's time! The ritual! We have to do it now!" "But I don't know how," I yelled back. "You will," she said. Then she grabbed my hands, and everything went white. When my vision cleared, I understood what Margaret had done. She'd passed the knowledge to me, the ritual, the words, everything her grandmother had learned. But the knowledge came with a price. Now I could see the truth about the fog, about the crawler, about everything, and the truth was worse than any nightmare. Margaret's body crumpled to the ground, her hair now as white as snow. But her sacrifice had given us a chance. She'd shown me how to fight this thing. As I held her cooling hand, I made a promise. James wouldn't die for nothing. Margaret wouldn't die for nothing. I was going to end this, no matter what it cost me. The fog pressed closer, and in it I saw 1,000 faces. Some I knew, some I didn't. All of them wore the same expression of pure terror. But now, I wasn't running anymore. Now I knew what to do. The real battle was about to begin. I sat with Margaret's body until sunrise, though it was hard to tell when morning came. The fog had gotten so thick that day and night looked the same. My lucky carabiner felt warm against my hip, the only familiar thing left in a world gone crazy. The knowledge Margaret had given me swirled in my head like the mist outside. I now knew things I wished I didn't. About the crawler, about the mountains, about fear itself. The ritual to stop it was there too, but it wasn't as simple as just saying some magic words. "You have to make it afraid," Margaret's voice echoed. In my memory, something that old, that powerful, has forgotten what fear feels like. That's its weakness. I gathered what I needed from Margaret's bag: more herbs, some small crystals, and a very old piece of leather with Cherokee words written on it. I didn't know the language, but somehow I could read them now. The fog seemed to watch me as I worked, growing darker and thicker around the ranger station. It was angry. It knew what I was planning. I checked my watch, but the hands were spinning wildly. Time didn't mean anything anymore. I'd learned that the crawler didn't just play tricks with time, it actually ate it, feeding on the fear people feel when they lose track of reality. "Okay," I said out loud, standing up. "You want to play? Let's play." I stepped outside, holding Margaret's herbs tight in my hand. The fog immediately tried to confuse me, but I knew what to look for now. The real fog was grey-white, but the crawler's fog had tiny shapes moving in it, like dark stars swimming. Through milk, I started walking toward Cherokee Burial Cave. Margaret's memories told me that's where it all started, hundreds of years ago. That's where the crawler first entered our world, and that's where it could be trapped again. The thing wearing James's face appeared beside me as I walked. "You're going the wrong way, Kate. The cave is over there." It pointed deeper into the fog. "Nice try," I said, not looking at it. The herbs helped me see through its lies. The real cave was in the opposite direction. It changed shape, becoming the little girl I couldn't save 2 years ago. "Why didn't you reach far enough, Kate? I was so close, so scared." My heart hurt, but I kept walking. "You're not her. You're not any of them." The shapes it turned into got stranger and scarier as I got closer to the cave. It showed me my worst memories, my deepest fears, but I didn't stop. Each step was harder than the last, like walking through deep water. Finally, I saw the cave mouth ahead. But something was wrong. The entrance looked bigger than I remembered, and it seemed to be breathing. Then I realized this wasn't just a cave anymore. This was the crawler's true mouth. "Kate Martinez," it spoke, not pretending to be human anymore. Its voice made the ground shake. "You cannot stop what has always been." The fog rushed at me like a tidal wave. Suddenly I was living through every scary moment of my life all at once. I was 6 years old, lost in a store. I was 12, falling off my first climbing wall. I was watching that little girl slip from my grasp 2 years ago. But this time, something was different. This time, I could see the fear for what it was. Just memories, just feelings. They couldn't really hurt me. I pushed forward step by step. The crawler's power was strong, but Margaret's knowledge was stronger. I could see what it really was now. A thing of smoke and shadows, old as the mountains themselves, but not as strong as it wanted us to believe. "Show me," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "Show me your true face." The cave mouth stretched, wider, and the fog pulled back like a curtain. What I saw there, I still can't describe it properly. It was like looking at a hole in the world. a place where reality just stopped working. But now I could see something else too. Something the crawler had been hiding all this time. It was afraid of being seen, afraid of being known, afraid of being trapped again like it had been before. I pulled out my lucky carabiner, the one thing that had always made me feel safe, and tied Margaret's leather strip to it. The Cherokee words began to glow with a soft blue light. You feed on fear, I said, taking another step forward. But you've never learned to face your own. The creature screamed, a sound that made my ears bleed. The fog turned into countless faces, everyone it had ever killed, everyone it had ever frightened to death. It was trying to overwhelm me with terror. But I kept walking. Each step made the carabiner glow brighter. I could feel the ritual working, using the crawler's own power against it. How does it feel? I asked, my voice stronger now. Being afraid, being hunted. The cave mouth started to close, trying to shut me out, but it was too late. The ritual was working. All around me, the fog began to pull away, revealing the real forest underneath. The crawler made one last attempt to stop me. It became my parents, my friends, everyone I'd ever loved, all begging me to stop. But I could see through all its tricks now. I reached the cave entrance just as it tried to close completely. Holding up the glowing carabiner, I spoke the Cherokee words Margaret had given me. Each word felt like fire in my mouth, but I didn't stop. The creature howled, its true voice shaking the whole mountain. The cave walls cracked, rocks fell all around me, but I kept speaking, forcing the crawler to face its own fears, its own darkness. Then everything went quiet. The fog vanished like it had never been there. The cave mouth shrank back to its normal size. My carabiner stopped glowing, but the leather strip had burned permanent marks into it. I fell to my knees, completely drained. My whole body hurt, and when I touched my hair, I realized it had turned. White like Margaret's, but we had won. The crawler was trapped again, sealed away by its own fears. As I stumbled back toward the ranger station, I saw the sun for the first time in days. It felt like years had passed, but my watch, now working normally again, said it had only been a week. The mountains looked different to me now. I knew too much about what lived in their depths, what slept in their shadows. But I also knew something else, something Margaret had tried to tell me. Fear doesn't have to control us. Sometimes facing our fears is the bravest, strongest thing we can do. And sometimes that's enough to save not just ourselves, but everyone. The walk back to the ranger station felt like it took forever. Every shadow made me jump, even though I knew the crawler was trapped. Some fears don't go away quickly, no matter how brave you try to be. When I finally got there, I found the place swarming with state police and rescue teams. The phones were working again, and someone had finally noticed that something was wrong in the Great Smoky Mountains. "Where have you been?" My boss, Ranger Mike Thompson, rushed over to me. "We've been searching for you for days, and your hair—" I touched my now white hair. "It's a long story, Mike. Did they find any bodies?" His face got serious. "No bodies, but we found evidence of the missing hikers. Their belongings were scattered all over the mountains. And James—" "I know about James," I said quietly. "And Margaret walking deer." Mike looked confused. "Margaret? She's at the Cherokee Community Center. She's been helping coordinate the search teams." My heart stopped. "That's impossible. I saw her die. She gave me the ritual." I ran to my truck and drove to the community center as fast as I could. Sure enough, there was Margaret, looking exactly like she always had. Her hair still black, her face unlined by fear. When she saw me, she smiled sadly. "I was wondering when you'd come." "I don't understand," I said, sitting down heavily in a chair. "I saw you die. You gave me the knowledge about the ritual, about the crawler." She nodded. "What you saw was my grandmother, or rather her memory, preserved in the mountains for just this moment. She knew the crawler would return, so she left a part of herself. behind, waiting for someone strong enough to use her knowledge. I pulled out my lucky carabiner with its burned markings. Then the ritual was real, she said. My grandmother trapped the creature 50 years ago, but she knew it would break. Free eventually? That's why she left her memories, her knowledge, for the next person who would need to face it. Why me? Margaret's eyes were kind. Because you understand fear, Kate. Real fear. Not just being scared of things, but the kind of fear that comes from caring so much it hurts, from trying to save people even when it seems impossible. I thought about the little girl I couldn't save, about James, about all the people the crawler had taken. Will it stay trapped this time? For a while, she said, but nothing lasts forever. Someday it will wake up again, and someone else will. Need to be ready. She reached for my carabiner, running her fingers over the Cherokee words burned into it. My grandmother's hair turned white too, you know. She said it was a small price to pay for saving the mountains. Over the next few weeks, things slowly went back to normal, or as normal as they could be. The missing hikers were officially declared lost, presumed dead. James was given a hero's funeral with an empty coffin since we never found his body. I kept working as a ranger, but everything felt different. I could still see traces of the crawler's power in the mountains, places where the shadows were a little too dark, where the fog moved a little too strangely. But now I knew what to look for and how to avoid it. The herbs Margaret had given me were dried and pressed between the pages of my ranger's notebook. Sometimes late at night, I could still smell their sharp, clean scent. A reminder that not all magic is dark, that some powers can protect as well as harm. My hair stayed white, and people often asked about it. I told them different stories depending on who was asking. To most, I said it was stress or genetics. To a few, the ones who looked like they might understand, I told a little more of the truth. One day, about 6 months after it all happened, a young hiker came into my station. She looked scared but trying to hide it. I saw something in the fog, she said, something that couldn't be real. I looked at her carefully. What makes you say it couldn't be real? Because fog doesn't move like that, and things don't change shape like that. I touched my lucky carabiner, feeling the warmth of the Cherokee words carved into it. Tell me everything you saw, I said, and don't worry about whether it sounds crazy or not. She talked for an hour, describing things that would have seemed impossible to me a year ago. When she finished, I gave her one of Margaret's herbs, carefully wrapped in leather. Keep this with you, I told her. And remember, being afraid doesn't make you weak. It's what you do when you're afraid that matters. After she left, I stood at my window, looking out at the mountains I'd known all my life. They held more secrets than I'd ever imagined, more darkness than most people could handle knowing about, but they held light too. Margaret's grandmother had proven that. Margaret herself had proven it. Even I had proven it in my own way. The sun was setting, turning the evening fog gold and pink. For a moment I thought I saw shapes in it, familiar faces smiling at me. James was there, looking young and happy again. The little girl I couldn't save waved at me, her face peaceful now. Maybe they were real, maybe they weren't. The mountains keep their own secrets, and some questions don't need answers. I touched my white hair, remembering Margaret's words about it being a small price to pay. She was right. Some prices are worth paying, especially when they buy something as important as hope. The fog still rolls through these mountains every day. Sometimes it behaves strangely, and sometimes people see things they can't explain. But now they have somewhere to go with those stories, someone who will believe them, and who knows what to do if the shadows start moving wrong again. My name is Catherine Martinez, and I guard these mountains now. Not just from normal dangers like bears or bad weather, but from the deeper, darker, things that most people never see. And if you're ever hiking in the Smokies and the fog starts moving strange, or if the shadows seem to watch you, don't be afraid to come find me. My hair might be white now, but my lucky carabiner still hangs at my hip, marked with words of power older than the mountains themselves. Because that's the thing about fear. It's not about never being scared. It's about facing what scares. You standing your ground and helping others do the same. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. The first time I saw the water turn red, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. After 20 years of search and rescue in these mountains, I'd seen just about everything, or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened. At Redwater Creek, in the summer of 1989. My name is Marcus Reynolds, and I've spent most of my life around water. Some people call me a hero because I've pulled 38 people from drowning over my career. Others think I'm just the weird guy who can sense when a river's about to flood or when a current's too dangerous for swimming. They don't know that every time I close my eyes, I still see the faces of my Marine squad disappearing under those dark waters in Afghanistan. Only my old diving compass, which I always keep in my pocket, reminds me that I made it out when they didn't. But this story isn't about my past. It's about what happened in Bridger Teton National Forest, where the trees grow so tall they block out the sun, and where an ancient creek holds secrets darker than the deepest ocean. I remember that. Morning clearly, the forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to know something wasn't right. I was doing my usual patrol, checking the trails near the old Scottish settlement. Not many people know about those century-old graves hidden among the pine. Trees, their headstones covered in moss so thick you can barely read the names. The creek looked normal at first. It always did during the day. Clear water tumbling over smooth rocks, making that peaceful sound that usually calms people down. But not me, not anymore. My lucky compass was spinning in my pocket, something it hadn't done since that day in Afghanistan. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. A group of deer stood frozen at the creek's edge. Usually they'd be drinking, but these deer were staring at the water like they'd seen a ghost. Their ears were pulled back, legs trembling. As I watched, one of them put its mouth to the water, then jerked back so fast it nearly fell over. The whole group bolted into the forest, leaving me alone with the creek and its secrets. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. The water looked normal, but something felt off. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It was like that, but worse, like the whole creek was watching me. 20 years of experience with water taught me to trust my gut, and right now my gut was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I knelt down and dipped my hand in the water. It was cold, too cold for summer. And there was something else. The current wasn't moving right. In all my years of water rescue, I'd learned that water follows rules. It flows downhill, moves in predictable patterns. But here, in one small spot, the water was swirling upstream, defying gravity itself. That's when I heard the singing. It wasn't loud, more like a whisper carried on the wind, the kind of sound that makes you doubt whether you're hearing it at all. But it was there, coming from somewhere downstream, near the waterfalls. A soft, haunting melody that made my skin crawl and my compass spin faster. I stood up, water dripping from my fingers, and made a decision that would change my life forever. Instead of calling it in like I should have, I decided to follow that sound. After all, I was the water expert, the guy with the sixth sense about rivers and lakes, the former Marine who'd survived when others hadn't. I didn't know it then, but that decision would lead me to face something that shouldn't exist, something that would make me question everything I knew about water, about reality itself. And by the time I discovered the truth about Redwater Creek, it would be too late to turn back. Little did I know, as I started walking downstream that morning, that I wasn't just following a strange sound. I was walking straight into a nightmare that had been waiting for someone like me for over 100 years. I followed the creek downstream, the singing getting clearer with each step. That's when I heard someone calling my name. Marcus! Hey, Marcus! It was Peter Walsh, my friend and fellow ranger. He was jogging toward me, his radio bouncing against his chest. Peter was one of the best swimmers I knew, used to teach kids at the local pool before joining the Forest Service. He had this big smile that made everyone trust him right away. "You need to see this," he said, catching his breath. "Something weird's happening up by Miller's Bend." I followed him through the trees, my compass still spinning in my pocket. Peter kept talking as we walked. "Remember those new campers who set up yesterday? They came running to the station this morning. Said their dog wouldn't stop barking at the water all night. When they woke up, all their water bottles were empty. Not spilled, empty. Like something drank them dry." I felt my stomach tighten. "Empty bottles doesn't mean much, Peter. Could be kids playing pranks." Yeah, that's what I thought too. But then I saw the fish. We reached Miller's Bend, a wide part of the creek where kids usually swim in summer. But there weren't any kids today. Instead, there were fish, dozens of them, swimming backwards, against the current. Not fighting it like salmon do, but swimming backwards like someone had pressed rewind on a movie. "I've never seen anything like it," Peter whispered. He reached down to touch the water, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. Something in my voice made him pull back. That's when we met Dr. Sarah Mackenzie. She was standing on the bank with all sorts of scientific equipment spread around her. She had short gray hair and wore a jacket with Marine Biology Institute written on it. She looked up as we approached. "You must be the Rangers," she said, not smiling. "I'm Dr. Mackenzie. The university sent me to study some unusual readings we've been getting from this creek." She showed us a small screen with lines jumping up and down. "These are sonar readings. They show what's under the water, and according to this," she paused, frowning. "According to this, there's a space under the creek that shouldn't be there, like a cave, but it moves." Peter laughed nervously. "Caves don't move." "No," Dr. Mackenzie said quietly. "They don't." The singing started again, louder this time. Dr. Mackenzie's equipment went crazy, beeping and flashing. The backward swimming fish suddenly disappeared, like they'd vanished into thin air. That's when the water began to change. It started slowly, just a hint of red in the clear water, like someone had dropped a single drop of blood upstream. Then another and another. Within minutes, the whole creek looked like rust-colored tea. "It's just minerals," Dr. Mackenzie said, but her voice shook. "Sometimes iron deposits can cause water to change color." But I knew better. Iron doesn't make water move wrong. It doesn't make fish swim backwards. And it definitely doesn't make that singing sound that was now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. We all jumped when Peter's radio crackled. "All Rangers report to the station immediately. We have a situation. Repeat, all Rangers report immediately." The voice on the side radio sounded scared. In 15 years at Bridger Teton, I'd never heard that tone in a ranger's voice. "You should go," Dr. Mackenzie said, still staring at her readings. "I'll stay and collect more data." As Peter and I headed back to the station, I looked over my shoulder. Dr. Mackenzie was kneeling by the water, reaching out to take a sample. The red water swirled around her hand in a way that water shouldn't move. I wanted to shout at her to get back, to run. But the words stuck in my throat. Because in that moment, just for a second, I saw something in the water looking back at her. Something with eyes that shouldn't have been there. And my compass, my lucky compass that had saved my life so many times, stopped spinning. It was pointing straight at the creek, like a finger pointing at danger, like a warning. The ranger station was chaos when we arrived. 3 other rangers were crowded around Chief Thompson, who was pointing at a map on the wall. Everyone stopped talking when we walked in. "Reynolds, Walsh, good, you're here," Thompson said. His face was pale. "We found something up by the old graves. Anderson, show them the photos." Anderson, a young ranger who'd only started last month, handed me his phone with shaking hands. The pictures made my blood run cold. It was a horse, or what was left of one. It looked like someone had sucked everything out from the inside, leaving just the skin and bones like an empty leather bag. The grass around it was soaking wet, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. "That's the third one this week," Thompson said quietly. "All the same way, all near water." Before anyone could say more, a woman burst into the station. She was crying, so hard she could barely speak. "My son," she choked out. He's just standing there. He won't move. He keeps staring at the water." Peter and I were the first ones out the door. We followed the woman to a spot near the creek where a small crowd had gathered. In the middle stood a boy, maybe 12 years old. He was standing at the creek's edge, perfectly still, like a statue. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the water. "Tommy," his mother called. "Tommy, please." I'd seen that look before, in Afghanistan, right before I lost my squad, that empty stare. I moved forward slowly, careful not to touch the water. The red color had faded, but the surface was like glass now, unnaturally still. "Everyone back up," I ordered. "Peter, get a rope." That's when Tommy started singing. It was the same melody we'd heard in the creek, but wrong somehow, like a child. Trying to copy a song they don't really know. His mother screamed. I reached for Tommy's shoulder. His skin was ice cold. As I pulled him back, he fought against me, trying to get to the water. That's when I saw what he was staring at. There were faces in the creek, dozens of them just below the surface. They looked like they were sleeping, peaceful almost. But then one opened its eyes and looked right at me. I yanked Tommy back hard, and we both fell onto the grass. He blinked suddenly, like waking up from a dream, and started crying. His mother rushed forward to grab him. "Get everyone away from the creek," I shouted. "Peter, help me set up warning tape. Nobody goes near the water." As we worked, Dr. Mackenzie appeared beside us. She looked scared. "I've run the tests," she said, holding up a water sample that now looked perfectly clear. "This isn't possible. The water, it's changing its molecular structure, like it's alive." "That's not the worst part," Peter added, his voice shaking. He pointed downstream. The setting sun hit the creek, and the water turned blood red again. But this time, we could all see it. The water was moving upstream, flowing backward, defying gravity. And in the fading light, something dark and huge moved under the surface. "I found records in the old settlement," Dr. Mackenzie whispered. "The Scottish settlers, they didn't just bring their families here. They brought their legends too. There's something they called the Ichwiske, a water horse. They built those graves as a warning, not a cemetery." "A warning about what?" Peter asked. Before she could answer, we heard screaming from the direction. Of Miller's Bend. High, terrified screaming that suddenly cut off into silence. The sun had set completely now. In the darkness, the red water seemed to glow. And that singing, that horrible, beautiful singing, was getting louder. My compass wasn't just pointing anymore. It was vibrating like it was trying to jump out of my pocket, warning me. But it was too late for warnings now, because whatever had been sleeping in Redwater Creek for the past 100 years wasn't just awake, it was hungry. We ran toward the screams, our flashlight beams bouncing through the darkness. The air felt thick and wet, like trying to breathe underwater. That singing was everywhere now, making it hard to think straight. We found an empty campsite at Miller's Bend. A tent was crushed flat, wet sleeping bags scattered everywhere. But no people. "Look at this," Dr. Mackenzie called. She was holding up an old book, its pages yellow with age. I found it in the settlement records. It's a diary from 1889. She started reading. "We thought we'd escaped it when we left Scotland, but it followed us. The Ichwiske always finds water. First, the horses disappeared. Then the children started hearing the songs." Peter interrupted, pointing at the creek. "Guys!" The water was glowing red now, bright enough to light up the trees. But that wasn't what made us all freeze. There was a horse standing in the middle of the creek. It was the most beautiful horse I'd ever seen. Pure white, with a flowing mane that moved like seaweed underwater. Steam rose from its wet coat, and its eyes were the same color as the red water. Peter took a step toward it. His face looked strange, empty. "Peter, don't," I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. "Can't you hear it?" he whispered. "It's calling me. It needs help." Dr. Mackenzie grabbed his other arm. "Don't look at its eyes. The diary says that's how it controls you." But Peter wasn't listening anymore. He walked toward the water, humming that awful song. The horse lowered its head, gentle and inviting. I tried to run after him, but my legs wouldn't move. The song was in my head now too, sweet and peaceful, making me want to just float away. Dr. Mackenzie's voice cut through the fog in my brain. She was reading from the diary again, shouting, "Iron! It fears iron and salt. The old ones knew. They buried iron nails in all the graves." The word iron made me remember my compass. I pulled it out of my pocket and threw it as hard as I could at the horse. The creature screamed, not like a horse, but like metal scraping on metal. Its beautiful shape rippled like water, showing something underneath that was all teeth and darkness. Peter snapped out of his trance and stumbled backward. But the creature was faster. A wave of red water rose up, wrapping around him like a giant hand. "No!" I ran into the creek, grabbing for Peter. The water was cold enough to burn. I caught his hand, but something stronger was pulling him under. The last thing I heard him say was, "Marcus, I can see them all down there." Then he was gone. The horse wasn't a horse anymore. It was something ancient and horrible, with too many eyes and skin that moved like oil on water. It looked right at me, and in my head I heard words. "You know what it's like, don't you? To watch your friends drown, to be the only one who survives." Images flashed through my mind. My squad in Afghanistan, the river, the darkness. The creature was in my memories, twisting them. Dr. Mackenzie's voice seemed to come from far away. "Marcus, the graves! We need to get to the graves!" I stumbled backward out of the water. My legs felt like ice. The creature rose up, towering over us, its shape changing like a nightmare. "Run!" I shouted. We ran through the dark forest, branches whipping our faces. Behind us I could hear water rushing, not just from the creek, but from every direction, like the creature could control all the water in the forest. "The settlers," Dr. Mackenzie gasped as we ran. "They didn't bury their dead in those graves. They buried iron, tons of it. They made a trap." "How does that help us?" I asked. "Because, look," she pointed ahead. Through the trees I could see the old graveyard, and in the moonlight, hundreds of old iron nails were sticking up through the dirt, like they'd been pushed out from underground. The creature's scream echoed through the forest. It was coming for us, and somehow I knew we wouldn't all make it. To those graves alive. The old graveyard was just ahead when we heard splashing behind us. Not normal splashing, it sounded like rain falling upward. Dr. Mackenzie looked back. That was her mistake. "Don't stop," I yelled. But it was too late. A wall of red water shot up from a small stream we'd just crossed. It wrapped around her legs like rope. She screamed and grabbed a tree branch. "Marcus, the diary!" She threw the old book at me, just as the water pulled her down. The ground where she'd been standing turned into thick, red mud that bubbled like it was boiling. I didn't have time to think. I ran for the graves, clutching the diary. The creature's song filled my head, trying to make me turn around, trying to make me look. Behind me, I heard Dr. Mackenzie's voice, but wrong somehow, like it was coming from underwater. "Marcus, come see what we found down here." I reached the graveyard and fell to my knees. My hands shook as I opened the diary, using my flashlight to read. Water was creeping up between the graves now, glowing red in the darkness. The diary's pages were full of strange drawings and hurried writing. One page had dark stains on it, like someone had been crying while they wrote, "The Ichweezga isn't just a water horse. It's ancient, from the deepest parts of the sea. It doesn't just drown people, it takes everything they are. Their memories, their souls. It keeps them forever in its underwater kingdom. Only blessed iron can hurt it, but you have to get close. Too close. A sound like thunder made me look up. The creature stood at the edge of the graveyard. It wasn't trying to look like a horse anymore. It was huge, its body made of twisting water and darkness. Where its face should have been, I saw Peter and Dr. Mackenzie's faces floating inside it, their eyes closed like they were sleeping. "You let them die," it said in my head. "Just like your squad. You're always the one who lives, aren't you, Marcus?" "No," I said, but I was crying now because it was right. I had survived when others hadn't. I'd carried that guilt for years. The creature moved closer. The iron nails in the ground started to rust and bend, like they were aging 100 years in seconds. The creature was destroying the only weapons we had. That's when I saw it. A small metal cross on one of the graves. It wasn't rusting like the nails. The diary had said blessed iron. I grabbed the cross just as a wave of red water swept over me. The cold hit me like a punch, and suddenly I was drowning, seeing things no person should ever see. I saw an underwater cave filled with bodies that looked like they were made of marble. They were perfectly preserved, faces peaceful but empty. Inside, I saw Peter floating there and Dr. Mackenzie and so many others. And deep in the cave, I saw my old squad from Afghanistan. The creature had taken them too. It had been following me, feeding on my guilt, growing stronger. The cross in my hand burned cold. The creature screamed in my mind, showing me everything it had seen in its long, evil life. I saw ancient ships sinking, people drowning across hundreds of years. I saw the Scottish settlers who'd tried to trap it and how it had waited all these years to get free. But most of all, I saw what it really was, a thing that fed on grief and guilt and fear. And right then, holding that old iron cross, I finally understood what I had to do. I just hoped I was strong enough to pay the price. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew I couldn't look at the creature directly. Its eyes would trap me like they'd trapped Peter. The diary had said something about sound, about following the songs. Maybe that was the answer. With shaking hands, I pulled off my shirt and tied it around my eyes. Complete darkness, just like diving in the deepest water. "You can't hide from me," the creature's voice echoed in my head. "I am in every drop of water, in every tear you've ever cried for them." The air got colder. I could feel water dripping up my legs, trying to pull me down. But now I could hear something else too, different layers in the creature's song. The newer voices, Peter, Dr. Mackenzie, they were on top. But underneath, deeper, I heard older songs. My squad, the settlers, everyone it had taken over hundreds of years. I gripped the iron cross tighter and listened harder. Under all those songs was one more sound, something ancient and angry. The creature's real voice. "That's right," I said out loud. "I can hear you now, the real you." Water crashed around me like a hurricane. The creature screamed in fury, but I stayed standing. I'd survived the worst river in Afghanistan. I'd carried the guilt of living when others died. I wasn't going to fall now. "You didn't take them," I said. "My squad. They were already gone when you found them. You just steal the memories of people who are already dead. You feed on grief like a coward." The creature roared. I felt its cold body wrap around me, trying to pull me into its underwater cave. But I held onto the cross and kept talking. "You're not ancient and powerful. You're just a shadow that hides in the water, a ghost that feeds on other ghosts." Suddenly I heard new voices in the song, but they weren't crying or screaming. They were helping me. Peter's voice, Dr. Mackenzie's voice, my squad, the settlers, all of them singing together, fighting back. "They're not yours anymore," I said. I swung the cross where I thought the creature's heart would be. I expected to hit water, but instead the iron struck something solid, the creature's real body. The scream that followed was like nothing on earth. The water around me turned to ice, then steam, then nothing at all. I felt the cross burn so cold it felt hot, melting into my hand. Something inside my head cracked, like breaking through ice, and suddenly all the voices were free. I heard them rising up, fading away into the night sky, free at last. The creature's dying scream shook the whole forest. Trees cracked, the ground split open. I fell to my knees, still holding what was left of the cross. Then everything went quiet. When I finally pulled off my blindfold, I was alone in the graveyard. The iron nails had turned to rust. The cross in my hand had melted, leaving a scar shaped like flowing water across my palm. But the red water was gone. The creek ran clear now, following the normal rules of nature again. No more singing. No more faces under the surface. I should have felt happy. We'd won. The creature was gone, but as I touched my face, I realized something was wrong, very wrong. My right eye, the one that had been closest to the creature when I stabbed it, wasn't working anymore. And in my left eye, the water in the creek didn't look like water at all. It looked like it was alive. They found me in the graveyard the next morning. I was still sitting there, watching the sun rise with my one good eye. The rescue teams had their lights, their radios, their questions. But I barely heard them. I was too busy watching the water. They never found Peter or Dr. Mackenzie's bodies. The official report said they were swept away by a flash flood. The same report blamed underground gas for the red water and a weak earthquake for the broken trees. People believe what they want to believe. The families of the missing people held a memorial service by the creek a week later. I watched from a distance as they threw flowers into the water. The creek carried them away normally, following all the right rules of nature. No more swimming backward, no more moving against gravity, but through my left eye, the one that had changed, I could see something different. I could see how alive the water really was. Not evil anymore, just awake. I could see the currents moving like veins under the surface. I could tell when rain was coming 3 days before the clouds appeared. And sometimes, when I was alone, I could hear the faintest whispers of old songs in every drop of water. They offered me my job back, but I couldn't do it. Not with what I knew now, not with what I could see. I left the ranger service and moved to a small cabin in the mountains, far from any lakes or rivers. I catch rainwater in barrels and keep them covered. I never look at still water anymore. No ponds, no puddles, no mirrors, but I still help people. When hikers get lost in rainstorms, I can feel which way they went. When floods are coming, I know before anyone else. I've saved 43 people now, more than I ever did as a ranger. The scar on my palm never healed. It shifts and moves like flowing water, especially when I'm near danger. My lucky compass doesn't work anymore. The needle just spins and spins when I hold it, but I don't need it now. My left eye is better than any compass. Sometimes people ask me about my eye patch or about what really happened at Redwater Creek. I tell them it was just a flash flood, just a normal accident. They believe me because they want to, but late, at night, when the rain hits my roof, I think about Peter and Dr. Mackenzie. I think about my squad. I think about all the people taken by the water over the years. And I wonder if they're really gone, or if they're still out there somewhere. Their songs mixing with the sound of every stream and every river. I keep the old diary locked in a box under my bed. Its pages are falling apart now, but one line still stands out clear as day. Water remembers, water waits, and sometimes water hungers. I know that's true now. I see it every day through my changed eye. The water is always alive, always watching. The creature in Redwater Creek wasn't the only one of its kind. It was just the one that got caught. So if you're ever in the mountains and you see water moving in ways it shouldn't, or hear singing coming from a quiet stream, don't look too long. Don't listen too hard. And whatever you do, don't look into its eyes, because water remembers, and it's always, always hungry. The first time I heard them howl, I knew they weren't normal wolves. I'd spent enough nights in these woods to know every animal cry, every rustle in the dark. But this sound, it made my blood freeze. It was like they were trying to speak words. My name's Thomas Wade Harrison, and I've seen things in these mountains that no one would believe, but I need to tell this story. Maybe it'll help someone else survive what I went through that summer of 1968. I run a cattle ranch on the edge of Ozark National Forest. It's peaceful most days. Just me, my herd, and memories of Sarah, my wife. She disappeared in these woods 3 years ago. The police said it was probably a bear attack, but they never found her body. I think deep down, I always knew there was something else out there. The nightmares from Vietnam had just started getting better when all this began. 20 years in the military teaches you to trust your gut, and that first week of June, my gut was screaming that something was wrong. My cattle were acting strange, huddling together even in the daytime, refusing to graze in the north pasture near the forest. My dog Buck, who'd fearlessly chased off bears and coyotes, wouldn't step foot outside after sunset. Maria Rodriguez was the first person who believed me. She was the local hunting guide, tough as nails and smart as they come. She showed up at my ranch one morning, her usual confident smile replaced by worry lines. "Thomas," she said, leaning against my porch railing, "you seen any weird tracks around your property? Like wolf prints, but wrong somehow?" I had. That morning I'd found tracks by the creek that made my skin crawl. They looked like wolf tracks, but they were huge, bigger than any wolf I'd ever tracked. And the way they were spaced, it was like whatever made them had been walking on 2 legs. I took Maria to see them. She crouched down, running her fingers along the edge of one print. "My grandmother used to tell stories," she said quietly, "about creatures that walked like men, but weren't men. I always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering into the forest at night. That same day, I noticed my compass going haywire. The needles spun in circles when I got near the ancient burial mounds deep in the forest. Those mounds had always given me an uneasy feeling. My Cherokee grandfather used to say some places hold old magic, both good and bad. Deputy John Marshall started coming around more often too. He was investigating missing hikers, 3 in the past month. He'd laugh off my concerns, tell me I was jumping at shadows. But I could see the fear in his eyes when we'd hear those howls at night. The worst part was the dreams. They started that first week, vivid flashbacks to Vietnam, but twisted somehow. In them, I'd be back in the jungle, but instead of enemy soldiers, I'd see glowing eyes in the dark, eyes that looked almost human. I remember sitting on my porch that Friday night, cleaning my grandfather's old hunting knife, the one with Cherokee protection symbols carved into the handle. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows across my land. As I watched, I swear I saw one of those shadows move against the wind. That's when I heard Billy Whitehawk's truck coming up my drive. The old man was respected by everyone around, here both natives and settlers. He knew things about these mountains that weren't in any history books. "Something's waking up, Thomas," he said without preamble, settling into the chair next to me. "Something that should have stayed sleeping. And it knows we're here." I looked out at the darkening forest, my hand tightening on the knife. The cattle were too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. And somewhere in those ancient woods, something that walked like a man but wasn't a man was watching us. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. The horror that followed would change everything I thought I knew about the world and about myself. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs earlier. The way the air felt heavy with electricity before sunset. The strange red haze that seemed to gather around the moon. The way animals would go completely silent when the wind blew from the north. But some truths are too terrible to face, even when they're right in front of you. And the truth about what lived in those woods? Well, that was just the beginning of our nightmare. The first dead cow showed up on a Tuesday morning. I found it in the north pasture, half hidden in the morning fog. What I saw made me sick too. My stomach, The cuts were too clean, too precise, nothing like the messy work of wolves or bears. It was like someone had used surgical tools. But why would anyone do that to a cow? Maria came by that afternoon to help me check the fences. She'd brought her hunting rifle, something she'd never done before. "Found more tracks," she said quietly as we walked the property line. "They're getting bolder, coming closer to the houses. Mrs. Jenkins said all 6 of her dogs hid under her porch last night. Wouldn't come out for anything." I knew what she meant. Buck hadn't eaten in 2 days, and he kept staring at the tree line like he was watching something move, something we couldn't see. That evening, I called Deputy Marshal about the cow. He sounded tired, distracted. 4th call like this. "Today," he said, "Anderson lost 2 sheep, and the Miller farm found one of their cows the same way. I'm heading out there now to take pictures." "Want some company?" I offered, not liking the idea of anyone being out there alone. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea. The Miller farm was quiet when we got there, too quiet. No birds, no insects, just dead silence. The cow was laid out in almost the same way as mine." Marshall took his photos, but his hands were shaking. "You ever seen anything like this before?" he asked me. "In all your tracking experience?" I shook my head. "Nothing natural makes cuts like that." That's when we heard it. A low growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marshall's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching something at the edge of the woods. For just a second, I saw eyes reflecting back at us. They were too high up to be a normal wolf, at least 7 feet off the ground. Marshall saw it too. He raised his gun, but whatever it was had already melted back into the shadows. Back home that night, I couldn't sleep. The moon was getting fuller, and the strange red haze around it was getting thicker. My compass was going crazy again, the needle spinning like a broken clock. I tried calling Billy Whitehawk, but his phone just rang and rang. Maria stopped by instead, carrying an old book her grandmother had left her. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a hand-drawn picture. It showed something that looked like a wolf standing upright like a man. The notes around it were in Spanish, but Maria translated for me. "It says they come when the moon bleeds," she read. "They hunt in packs, but not like normal wolves. They think, they plan, they—" She paused, her voice dropping. "They remember their victims' fears." That night, the dreams were worse than ever. I was back in Vietnam, but the enemy soldiers had wolf eyes that glowed in the dark. I could hear them talking in my head, using voices I hadn't heard in years. My dead army buddies, Sarah, even my grandfather. I woke up to find Buck whining under my bed. The temperature had dropped so much I could see my breath, even though it was June. Outside, something moved through my yard, staying just out of sight. The motion sensor lights kept flickering on and off, but each time they lit up, there was nothing there. The next morning, I found fresh tracks in my garden. They were the same as before, wolf prints, but wrong. They walked in a straight line like a person's footprints and stopped right under my bedroom window. Maria called early, her voice tense. "They found Deputy Marshal's car on Forest Road 7, she said. "Engine running, lights on, but he's not there. Thomas, there's blood on the seats." I grabbed my grandfather's knife and my rifle, though something told me normal bullets wouldn't help much against what we were dealing with. As I headed out to meet Maria, I caught movement in my rearview mirror, a tall, dark shape watching from the tree line. For the first time, I understood what true fear felt like. Not the normal fear of wolves or bears or even enemy soldiers. This was different. This was the fear of something that shouldn't exist. Something that hunted not just for food, but for pleasure. And somehow I knew it was watching me back, planning, waiting, learning. The red moon hung in the sky like a warning sign, and somewhere in the forest, those things that looked like wolves, but weren't wolves, were getting ready to make their next move. We had no idea then that what we'd seen so far was just the beginning. The real horror was still to come. They found Deputy Marshal's badge the next morning, deep in the woods near one of the old burial mounds. No body, just the badge, torn and bent like it had been crushed by giant teeth. The search teams wouldn't go near the area after dark. They said the shadows didn't move right there. I knew what they meant. I'd been seeing strange things too. Shadows that stretched the wrong way, trees that seemed to bend away from certain spots in the forest. The red haze around the moon was getting thicker every night, making everything look like it was covered in blood. Maria and I spent that morning at Billy Whitehawk's house. The old man was burning sage and drawing symbols on his windows with white chalk. "They're getting stronger," he said, his weathered hands shaking slightly. "The pack is growing, learning. My grandfather told me stories about them, but I never thought—" He stopped, looking out his window at the forest. "They're not just animals, Thomas. They remember things. They get inside your head." I knew he was right. The nightmares were getting worse. Last night I dreamed I was talking to Sarah. She was standing at the edge of the woods, calling me. But when I got closer, her face changed. Her eyes turned yellow, her smile full of sharp teeth. Maria grabbed my arm suddenly. "Look," she whispered, pointing out Billy's window. There was something standing between the trees. It looked like a shadow at first, but then it moved. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Its head was like a wolf's, but its body stood upright, and it was wearing something around its neck that glinted in the sunlight, something that looked like military dog tags. Billy started praying in Cherokee, his voice urgent. The thing in the trees turned its head toward us, and I felt a pressure in my mind, like someone trying to push their way in. Images flashed through my head. Jungle warfare, dead friends, Sarah's disappearance. The creature was pulling these memories right out of my brain. "Don't look in its eyes," Billy shouted, but it was too late. Maria had already made eye contact. She froze, her whole body shaking. Later she told me she saw her worst fears playing out in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. The creature disappeared when Billy threw something at the window, a small leather pouch filled with herbs and bones. "They don't like the old medicines," he explained, "or blessed objects. That's why they haven't come into my house yet." We spent the rest of the day preparing. Billy taught us how to make protection charms, showing us which herbs to mix, which prayers to say, but his hands kept shaking, and he kept looking at the windows. "They're planning something," he said. "The pack, they work together, not like normal wolves. They think like soldiers." That's when it hit me. The dog tags I'd seen around the creature's neck, the way they moved like a military unit, how they seemed to know strategic weak points around our properties. "What if they were soldiers once?" I asked quietly. "What if something changed them?" Maria looked up from the protection charm she was making. "There was a military testing facility deep in these woods back in the 50s, she said. "My grandmother used to talk about strange lights, weird noises at night. The whole place was suddenly abandoned in 57. No one knew why." Night was falling as we drove home. The moon was almost full now, casting everything in that strange red light. We could hear howls in the distance, but they weren't like regular wolf howls. They had words in them, words just on the edge of being understood. I dropped Maria off at her house, making sure she got inside safely. As I drove home, I kept seeing movements in my rearview mirror, dark shapes running through the trees parallel to my truck. They were pacing me, staying just out of clear sight. At home, Buck was hiding under my bed again. I could hardly blame him. The air felt wrong, heavy and electric, like just before a big storm. But this wasn't any natural storm coming. I checked my grandfather's knife, the protection symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. Outside, the howls were getting closer. They seemed to be coming from all around the house now. And in my head, I could feel them trying to get in, pushing at my thoughts, trying to make me see things that weren't there, or maybe they were there. Maybe they'd been there all along, and we were only now beginning to see them for what they really were. The red moon hung in the sky like an open wound, and somewhere in the darkness, those things that used to be men were getting ready to hunt. Tomorrow would be the full moon, and somehow I knew they'd been waiting for that. They weren't just picking us off one by one anymore. They were getting ready for something bigger, something worse, and we still didn't know how to stop them. The night they came for Billy Whitehawk, I was too late. I heard his truck horn blaring non-stop through the woods, our emergency signal. By the time I got there, his front door was torn off its hinges. The protection symbols he'd drawn were smeared away, like giant claws had deliberately wiped them. And clean. Inside, the house was cold as ice. Papers were scattered everywhere, and Billy's protection charms were torn apart. But it was the writing on the wall that made my blood freeze. Words scratched into the wood by huge claws. "We remember you, Sergeant Harrison." They knew me. They knew who I was, what I'd done in the war. This wasn't just some animal attack. This was personal. I found Maria already there, her rifle ready. She pointed to tracks on the floor, huge wolf prints, but some of them had bits of army boot prints mixed in, like the creature was changing as it walked. "They took him alive," she said quietly. "The tracks lead north, toward the old military facility." That's when we heard it, Billy's voice calling from the woods. But there was something wrong with it, like someone was trying to copy how he talked, but couldn't quite get it right. "They're trying to lure us out," Maria whispered. "They've learned how to mimic voices." She was right. Through the windows we could see them now, 7-foot-tall shapes moving through the trees. They walked on 2 legs, their bodies a twisted mix of wolf and human. The one in front wore military dog tags that clinked softly as it moved. Its eyes glowed red in the moonlight, and when it looked at me, I felt it pushing into my mind again. Suddenly, I was back in Vietnam. The jungle around me was thick with gunfire and screaming, but this time the enemy soldiers had wolf heads, and they were calling my name with the voices of my dead friends. Maria's hand on my arm snapped me back. "Don't let them in," she said. "They're trying to trap you in your memories." The creatures moved like a military unit, spreading out to surround the house. Their movements were tactical, planned, just like we'd been trained in the army. That's when I remembered something about that old military facility. There had been rumors about secret experiments, soldiers volunteering for some kind of new treatment, soldiers who went in but never came out. One of the wolf things stepped into the moonlight. Around its neck, along with the dog tags, was a piece of cloth I recognized, the same kind of scarf Sarah had been wearing the day she disappeared. "Thomas," Maria's voice was urgent. "We need to move, now." We made it to her truck just as they charged. They were fast, faster than anything that big should be able to move. Maria fired her rifle, but the bullets seemed to pass right through them like they were made of smoke. As we drove, they ran alongside us in the woods. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. I could see their faces clearly now. Wolves' heads, with human eyes. Eyes that knew me, eyes that held memories of what they used to be. We headed for the old burial mounds. Billy had said they held power, old magic that might help us. But as we drove, I kept seeing flashes in my head. Sarah walking into the woods, Billy being dragged away, Deputy Marshal's last moments. The creatures were showing me these things, trying to break my mind with fear. Maria gripped the steering. "Wheel tighter." "They're getting stronger," she said through clenched teeth. "The closer to the full moon, the more power they have." Something huge landed on the truck's roof, claws punching through the metal. Maria swerved, and I caught a glimpse of a wolf-like face looking down through the windshield. It wore sergeant's stripes on what was left of its military uniform. "Harrison," it spoke, its voice a horrible mix of growl and human speech. "You left us there, left us to change." Maria slammed on the brakes, throwing the creature off. We skidded to a stop near the largest burial mound. the protection charms Billy had given. Us were glowing brightly now, and the creatures stayed back, circling just beyond the reach of their light. They're not just hunting us, I realized watching them move. They're punishing us, punishing me. The pack leader stepped forward. In the red moonlight, I could see its dog tags clearly now. The name was still readable, Sergeant James Walker. The commander of the unit that had gone missing at that facility back in '57. The full moon was rising higher, and the creatures were getting bolder. They had us surrounded, and Billy was still missing. But now we knew what they were, and why they were here. The real question was, how do you fight something that's already dead? Something that used to be human? Maria checked her rifle, even, though we knew bullets wouldn't work. Whatever we do, she said, we do it fast. We've got about an hour until the moon is at its peak. The creatures moved closer, their human eyes filled with a hatred that no animal could possess. This was it, our last stand against something that should never have existed, and somewhere in the woods, Billy was still alive, waiting for us to find him. We found Billy tied up in the old military bunker, half frozen but alive. The creatures had left him there as bait, knowing we'd come. As soon as we stepped inside, the heavy metal door slammed shut behind us. "It's a trap," Billy whispered, his voice weak. "They herded us here. This place. This is where it happened. Where they changed." The bunker walls were covered in claw marks and old bloodstains. Papers were scattered everywhere. Military documents, experiment reports, things that should have stayed buried. In the corner, I saw a familiar shape. Sarah's backpack, covered in dust. "Thomas!" Maria's voice shook a little. "Look at this!" She was holding a folder marked Project Moonwolf. Inside were photos of soldiers, men I recognized. Sergeant Walker's unit. The last photo showed them strapped to metal tables while doctors, in white coats, injected them with something that glowed silver in the dim light. The whole bunker shook as something huge landed on the roof. Dust fell from the ceiling, and we could hear them up there, scratching, pacing, waiting. "The moon's almost at its peak," Billy said. "That's when they're strongest. But it's also when they're most human. When they remember most clearly." He pulled something from his coat, a small leather bag. "I managed to hide this. It's my strongest medicine." Maria was checking the room for another way out when the first one dropped through the ventilation shaft, a massive wolf thing wearing army boots and dog tags. In the bunker's emergency lights, I could still see the human in its eyes, the pain, the anger. More followed, dropping from above, pushing through the walls like they were made of paper. Soon we were surrounded by the whole pack. Sergeant Walker, their leader, stepped forward. Up close, I could see the military medals still pinned to the rags of his uniform. "Harrison," his voice was more human now, filled with hatred. "You were supposed to be here that day, part of the experiment, but you were late. You lived while we became this." The memories hit me like a physical blow, my car breaking down that day, making me miss the experiment. The guilt I'd carried all these years, not knowing why I felt responsible. "They turned us into monsters," Walker snarled, "left us to rot when it went wrong, and you went on living." That's when Maria made her move. She threw Billy's medicine bag at Walker's feet. It burst open, filling the air with blessed herbs and bone dust. The creatures howled in pain, backing away from the cloud of sacred smoke. "The burial mound," Billy shouted. "Get to the burial mound." We ran, the pack close behind us. Their howls were changing, becoming more human, screams of pain and rage. The full moon hung directly overhead as we reached the ancient mound. Maria took position at the entrance, her rifle loaded with the last of Billy's blessed bullets. "Go!" she yelled. "End this. I'll hold them back." I wanted to argue, but there was no time. The pack was closing in, and Maria had already made her choice. The last I saw of her, she was firing into the pack, each shot blazing with blue fire. Inside the burial mound, Billy worked fast, drawing symbols on the walls with chalk made from crushed bones. My grandfather's knife grew warm in my hand, the Cherokee protection symbols glowing brighter than ever. Walker burst in, his massive form filling the entrance. Behind him, I heard Maria scream, a sound that will haunt me forever. "You can't stop this," Walker growled. "We're already dead. We're beyond your sacred places, your blessed weapons." But he was wrong. In the burial mound, surrounded by ancient power, I could see what they truly were. Not monsters, but men. Cursed, changed, but still men. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. Sorry for what they did to you." Something flickered in Walker's eyes, a moment of humanity. That's when I struck, driving my grandfather's knife into his heart. The blade glowed white-hot, and Walker howled. Not a wolf's howl, but a man's scream. The other creatures felt it too. Their bodies began to shift and change, the wolf parts fading like smoke. Soon, all that was left were the bodies of men. Old bones wearing tattered uniforms, we buried them properly, with military honors. Maria was given a hero's funeral. We found Sarah's remains in the bunker and laid her to rest too. The government tried to cover it all up, but the truth has a way of getting out. The pack is gone, but not forgotten. Sometimes, on full moon nights, I still hear howls in the distance. Different now, sadder, more human, and sometimes in my dreams I see them running free through eternal forests, finally at peace. I still live on my ranch, keeping watch. The compass still spins near the burial mounds, and Buck still won't go out at night. Billy visits sometimes, and we talk about what happened, about sacrifice, redemption, and the thin line between man and monster. The dog tags we found are kept, safe in the burial mound, along with my grandfather's knife. A reminder that some stories need to be remembered, even the ones that hurt. And if you're ever in these woods on a full moon night, and you hear something that sounds almost like words in the howls, just remember, not all monsters are born. Some are made, and sometimes the only way to find peace is to help them remember what they used to be. But that's just the beginning of another story. One I'm not ready to tell. Not yet. Something is wrong with my forest. I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 23 years, and I've never seen the trees act this way. Yes, you heard me right. Act. The forest is alive in ways I can't explain, and for the first time in my career, I'm scared of what lies beneath these ancient branches. My name is David Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew every inch of this park. The towering Douglas firs, the hidden streams, even the secret paths where Roosevelt elk come to drink. They were all like old friends to me. But now the forest feels like a stranger. It started with the mist. Usually, the morning fog burns off by 10, but lately it's been clinging to the forest floor like a ghost that won't leave. I noticed it during my regular patrol, leaning on my old logging axe that I use as a walking stick. The mist swirled around my boots in ways that didn't match the wind. Then came the trees. I'm a botanist, studied it in college before Vietnam, before I lost my boy over there. Plants are my life, and I know how they should grow. But last Tuesday I found a grove of saplings that hadn't been there the day before, not just sprouted. These were 3 feet tall, with leaves as dark as emeralds. That's impossible. Trees don't grow overnight. I marked the spot on my map, even though I've never needed one before. Something in my gut told me this was important. The next day, those saplings were gone. In their place was a circle of mushrooms bigger than truck. Tires. Their caps an unnatural shade of green I'd never seen before. The animals know something's wrong too. The birds have gone quiet in certain parts of the forest. Yesterday, I watched a herd of elk take a 3-mile detour around a perfectly good meadow. When I went to check it out, I found strange markings carved into the trees. Not from bears or humans, but something else. The symbols looked old, ancient even, but I swear they weren't there last week. But the worst part, the thing that keeps me up at night, it's the sounds. The forest has always had its noises, wind in the leaves, creaking branches, the occasional snapping twig. But now I hear whispers, not the wind, not animals, but actual whispers. Sometimes, when I'm alone on the trail, the rustling leaves sound like words in a language I almost understand. Last night, as the sun was setting, I found something that made my blood run cold. There's an old part of the forest where the trees are so big, it takes 5 people holding hands to circle their trunks. In the center of this grove, the ground was pulsing, like a heartbeat, like the earth itself was breathing. I've called in 2 experts to help me figure this out. Dr. Linda Warren, a hotshot botanist from Seattle, and Michael Foster, a young ranger who's too eager for his own good. They arrive tomorrow, but tonight as I sit in my cabin writing this down, I can hear something moving in the darkness outside. The trees are whispering again. And this time, I think they're calling my Dame. I've spent my whole life in these woods. I've seen bears up close, faced down mountain lions, rescued lost hikers in the worst storms you can imagine. But what's happening now? This is different. The forest wants something, and I have a terrible feeling I'm about to find out what it is. Dr. Warren and Michael Foster arrived early this morning. I watched their truck wind up the narrow park road through the mist, which still hadn't lifted. Dr. Warren stepped out first, a tall woman with grey-streaked hair and careful eyes. Foster jumped out after her, practically bouncing with excitement, like a puppy on its first walk. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Warren shook my hand firmly. I read your report 3 times. If what you're saying about overnight plant growth is true, we might be looking at something completely new to science. Foster was already wandering around my cabin, poking at my collection of pressed plants. This is so cool. I've heard stories about weird stuff in this part of the park, but I always thought they were just stories. I grabbed my axe walking stick and led them into the forest. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Usually you'd hear squirrels chattering or woodpeckers working on the trees, but today there was nothing but the soft crunch of our boots on dead leaves. The first strange spot is about a mile ahead, I said, pointing with my axe. But there's something else I need to show you first. I took them to the pulsing ground I'd found yesterday. Dr. Warren knelt down, pressing her hand against the earth. Her face went pale. This isn't possible, she whispered. The soil temperature is at least 20 degrees warmer than it should be, and there's definitely some kind of rhythm. Foster pulled out his phone to take pictures, but it wouldn't. Turn on. Weird, he muttered. I charged it full this morning. That's when we heard it, a low groan that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Dr. Warren jumped back from the ground. Above us, the branches swayed, even though there wasn't any wind. Look! Foster pointed at a thick vine growing up a nearby tree. We all watched in silence as it moved, not swaying, but actually crawling up the trunk like a snake. In less than a minute, it had climbed 30 feet. That growth rate is impossible, Dr. Warren said, her scientist's calm cracking a little. She pulled out a sample bag and reached for the vine. Wait, I started to say, but it was too late. The moment she touched it, every vine in sight suddenly pulled away, retreating up into the canopy with a sound like rustling paper. Foster laughed nervously. Okay, that was creepy. We spent the next few hours documenting everything we could. Dr. Warren took soil samples and measurements, muttering to herself about unprecedented botanical reactions. Foster kept trying to use his phone, but none of our electronics would work in this part of the forest. Then we found the wall. We were heading to my second marked location when we ran into it, a solid barrier of plants and vines that hadn't been there yesterday. It was at least 15 feet high, woven so tight you couldn't see through it. The The strange thing was, it curved in a perfect circle around something we couldn't see. "We should check what's on the other side," Foster said, pulling out his pocket. "Knife, no!" I grabbed his arm. I couldn't explain why, but I knew cutting through would be dangerous. "Something's telling me we need to leave it alone." Dr. Warren was staring at the wall with an odd look in her eyes. "David, do you see these markings? They're like the ones you photographed, but different. I think they're some kind of writing." She was right. Carved into the thick vines were symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim forest light. They looked old, older than the oldest trees in the park. That's when we heard the footsteps, heavy ones, coming from the other side of the wall. Whatever was making them was big, bigger than a bear. We all froze. A deep sound rumbled through the forest, not quite a growl, not quite a word. The branches above us creaked and swayed. More vines began growing down from the trees, reaching toward us like fingers. "We need to leave," I whispered. "Now." We backed away slowly. The footsteps stopped, but I could feel eyes watching us through the wall of plants. The forest had gone completely silent again. As we hurried back to my cabin, I noticed Dr. Warren collecting leaves from certain trees, marking them carefully in her notebook. Foster kept looking over his shoulder, but it was what I saw when I glanced back one last time that really shook me. The wall of plants was gone, like it had never been there at all. That night, after the others went to sleep in their tents outside my cabin, I sat at my window watching the forest. The mist had grown thicker, and in it I could have sworn I saw shapes moving. Tall shapes that walked on two legs. The trees whispered again, and this time one word came through clear as day. Soon. I woke up to screaming. It was Foster yelling from his tent. By the time I got outside with my flashlight, Dr. Warren was already there. Foster's tent was wrapped in vines, thick dark ones that hadn't been there when we went to sleep. They were squeezing the tent like a giant hand. "Hold still!" I shouted, pulling out my pocket knife. The vines felt warm under my fingers as I cut through them. They twitched and pulled back like they could feel pain. Foster scrambled out, his face white as paper. "They were trying to drag my tent," he gasped. "I felt them pulling me toward the forest." Dr. Warren was examining the vines I'd cut. "These aren't normal plants," she said quietly. "The cells are all wrong. They're changing as I watch." That's when we heard the trees moving, not swaying in the wind, actually moving. Their trunks were bending, their branches reaching. In the grey morning light, we watched as a line of ancient Douglas firs slowly tilted toward us. It looked like they were trying to get a better look at us. "We need to document this," Foster said, his fear suddenly replaced with excitement. Before I could stop him, he ran back to his tent and grabbed his camera. "Foster, wait!" I called, but he was already heading into the forest, snapping pictures. Dr. Warren and I followed him. The mist was thick between the trees, and everything was quiet except for the creaking of wood and Foster's excited voice ahead of us. Then we heard something else, a deep sound like drums beating far underground. "Over here!" Foster called. "You have to see this!" We found him standing in front of an old stump, but this wasn't any normal stump. It was covered in those strange symbols again, and they were glowing with a faint green light. The ground around it was bare, no plants, no moss, not even dead leaves. Just dark, rich soil that seemed to pulse with that same drumbeat we could feel. "This is incredible," Foster said, stepping closer to take more pictures. "These symbols look like some kind of Native American writing, but I've never seen anything like—" "Stop!" Dr. Warren suddenly shouted. "Look at the trees!" All around us, the trees had moved again. They were forming a circle, their branches weaving together overhead until we could barely see the sky. We were trapped. That's when we heard the whispers, not just from the leaves this time. They seemed to come from the ground itself, words in a language I didn't know, but somehow still understood. They were angry. "Foster," I said slowly, "step away from the stump. Now." But Foster wasn't listening. He was touching the symbols, tracing them with his fingers. "They're warm," he said, amazed, "and I think I can read them. They're saying something about guardians and sacred." The ground exploded. Roots burst from the soil, thick as my arm and moving like snakes. They wrapped around Foster's legs before any of us could react. He screamed and tried to run, but more roots were coming up, grabbing at him. Dr. Warren and I rushed forward to help, but vines dropped from the trees, holding us back. We could only watch as the roots pulled Foster toward the stump. "I'm sorry," he screamed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." The drumbeat got louder. The symbols on the stump were glowing brighter now, casting green light across Foster's terrified face. The soil around the stump began to sink, forming a deep hole. That's when we saw them. In the mist between the trees, huge shapes moved. They were tall, much taller than any person, and covered in dark fur. Their eyes glowed with the same green light as the symbols. One of them stepped forward, and I felt my heart stop. Bigfoot, but not like any Bigfoot story I'd ever heard. These creatures moved with purpose, with intelligence. They raised their massive arms, and the roots responded, pulling Foster closer to the hole. "Wait!" I shouted, finally breaking free of the vines. "Please! He didn't understand!" The largest creature turned to look at me. Its eyes met mine, and suddenly my head was filled with images, centuries of history flashing by in seconds. I saw these beings protecting the forest, living in harmony with it, using powers I couldn't understand. I saw them hiding as humans came, watching as we cut down trees and built roads. I saw their anger growing. The creature's voice echoed in my mind. He disturbed sacred ground. The forest demands payment. The roots were pulling Foster closer to the hole. Dr. Warren was frozen beside me, her face a mask of terror and wonder. Foster's camera lay forgotten on the ground, its screen cracked and dark. I had to make a choice. Fast. I stepped forward, holding my old axe out in front of me, not as a weapon, but as an offering. "Take me instead," I said. "I'm the senior ranger. I'm responsible for him." The largest Bigfoot, I could tell it was their leader, tilted its head. The roots holding Foster stopped pulling, but didn't let go. "Please," I continued, "let me make this right." The leader made a sound like rocks grinding together, and suddenly I could understand their words clearly in my mind. All of us could, even Foster. "You speak with respect," the voice rumbled in our heads, "unlike this young one who tramples sacred ground." Dr. Warren stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "We didn't know. We're scientists. We study plants, life. We want to understand, not destroy." The creature turned its glowing eyes to her. "Understanding requires listening. Your kind has forgotten how to listen to the forest." As if to prove its point, the leader touched a nearby tree. Instantly, the trunk split open like a door, revealing a hollow space inside that glowed with soft green light. Inside, we could see things moving, vines and leaves growing and changing shape in seconds. "We are the forest's voice," the leader explained. "We speak for the trees, the soil, the roots that run deeper than your oldest memories. We have guarded this place since the first seeds fell." To show us what they meant, the Bigfoot creatures began to change. Their fur shifted color like moss in sunlight. Some of them stepped backward into trees, their bodies merging with the bark until they disappeared completely. Others knelt and touched the ground, making flowers sprout and bloom instantly under their huge hands. "Incredible," Dr. Warren whispered. She took a step closer to examine the flowers, and something strange happened. The blooms turned to face her, their petals changing color in response to her presence. "They're reacting to my emotions," she said in wonder. The leader nodded. "The forest feels everything: joy, fear, respect, and disrespect." It looked pointedly at Foster, who had stopped struggling against the roots. "I didn't mean to disrespect anything," Foster said, his voice small. "I just wanted to document it, to show people. Show people." The leader's mental voice grew dark. "So more can come. More can disturb the sacred places, cut down the ancient ones, build their dead stone paths." The roots tightened around Foster, making him yelp. The drums began beating faster underground. That's when Dr. Warren did something none of us expected. She walked right up to the glowing stump and placed her hands on it. Her eyes went wide. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, I can feel it. The whole forest. It's all connected, all alive, all aware." The leader turned to her with interest. "You hear it? You feel the song of the deep green?" Dr. Warren nodded, tears running down her face. "It's beautiful, but it's angry too, hurt. All these years of being cut and burned," and she couldn't finish, because right then her hands began to change. The bark from the stump was spreading up her arms, but she wasn't afraid. She was smiling. "Linda," I shouted, starting toward her, but the leader held up a hand, stopping me. "She has chosen to listen," it said, "to truly understand." We watched in amazement as Dr. Warren's transformation continued. The bark crept up her shoulders, across her face. But she wasn't disappearing. She was changing, becoming something between human and tree, her hair turning to leaves, her skin to living wood. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with the same green light as the Bigfoot creatures. "David," she said, her voice somehow both human and not. "I can hear everything, every root, every leaf, the forest. It's like a giant brain thinking thoughts too big for us to understand. And these beings," she gestured to the Bigfoot creatures, "they're its guardians, its children." The leader nodded approvingly, but then its expression darkened again as it turned back to Foster. "Now you must choose," it said to all of us. "The forest demands balance. Blood has power, death has power, but so does transformation, so does understanding." Foster looked at Dr. Warren, then at me, then at the dark hole still waiting beneath him. He swallowed hard. "I want to understand. Like Dr. Warren, please let me learn." The leader studied him for a long moment. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. "No," it finally said. "Your heart speaks fear, not respect. You would use this knowledge as a weapon. The forest sees this." The roots began pulling again. Foster screamed, and that's when I made my final choice, one that would change everything forever. I dropped my axe and stepped into the circle of roots. "Take both of us," I said, "or neither." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You would share his punishment?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm offering something else. My whole life I've protected this forest, even before I knew what it really was. I've stopped poachers, fought fires, kept people from harming the ancient trees. I lost my son in Vietnam, but this forest, it became my new family." I took a deep breath. "So here's my deal. Let Foster go. In return, I'll stay. Not as a prisoner, but as a guardian, like you, like Dr. Warren." Foster stared at me. "Mr. Thompson, no, you can't." "Be quiet," I told him, not unkindly. "You have a lot to learn about respect, but you deserve a chance to learn it." The leader raised its massive hand, and suddenly I could see the forest the way they saw it. It was like looking at a living map made of light. Every tree was connected to every other tree by glowing lines running through the ground. The whole forest was alive, breathing, thinking, and there were dark spots, places where humans had hurt it, where the connection was broken. "You see truly," the leader said, "but the price of becoming a guardian is high. You would never leave this place, never see your human family again, never be fully human again." Dr. Warren, or what used to be Dr. Warren, stepped forward. Her wooden fingers touched my arm. "David, it's more than just staying here. You become part of it. The forest's thoughts become your thoughts. Its memories become your memories. It's beautiful, but But you lose yourself, I finished for her. She nodded, leaves rustling. The underground drumbeat changed its rhythm. The roots around Foster loosened slightly. The forest is considering your offer, the leader said, but it requires proof. Blood freely given has power. I understood. Without hesitation, I took my pocket knife and cut my palm. I let the blood drip onto the sacred stump. The effect was instant. The symbols blazed with bright green light. The roots holding Foster suddenly unwound and pulled back. Into the ground. He fell forward, gasping. Run, I told him. Get out of here, but remember what you saw today. Remember to respect the wild places. Foster scrambled to his feet. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Finally, he just nodded and ran, disappearing into the mist between the trees. The leader stepped forward. The choice is made. The blood is given. Are you ready to begin? I looked at Dr. Warren one last time. Despite her transformed face, I could see she was happy, at peace. Maybe I could be too. Yes, I said, I'm ready. The roots came for me then, but gently. They wrapped around my legs like old friends. The bark began to creep up from the ground, covering my boots, my legs. But it wasn't scary. It felt right. The leader pressed its huge hand against my forehead. Receive the forest's wisdom, it said. Memories flooded into my mind, memories that weren't mine. I saw the forest when it was young, thousands of years ago. I saw the first Bigfoot beings emerge from the oldest trees, born from the forest's need for guardians. I saw centuries of seasons pass like minutes. The bark reached my chest now. My fingers were becoming branches. My hair turned to leaves. With each change, I could feel more of the forest's thoughts, its hopes, its fears, its deep, patient wisdom. Through it all, one truth became clear. The forest wasn't just alive. It was awake, aware. And now, I would be part of its mind forever. The dark transformation reached my neck. Soon, I would be like Dr. Warren, not quite tree, not quite human, but something new, something ancient, something necessary. With my last human words, I whispered, I'm home. They say Olympic National Park is different now. Foster made it back to the ranger station that morning, but he wasn't the same person who went into the forest. He quit his job as a ranger the next day. Before he left, he destroyed all his cameras and photographs. When people asked him why, he just said, some things need to stay secret. The Park Service sent search teams to look for me and Dr. Warren. They found my cabin empty, my axe leaning against the sacred stump. They posted missing person notices, but after a while they stopped looking. The forest has its secrets, and now we're two of them. But we're not really missing. We're more present than ever. I am the whisper in the leaves that warns hikers away from dangerous paths. I am the branch that bends down to offer fruit to hungry deer. I am the roots that hold the soil together during storms. Dr. Warren is here too. Sometimes on quiet mornings, you can hear her humming to the young saplings, teaching them how to grow strong and tall. Her love of learning didn't disappear. It just changed. Now she studies the endless mysteries of the forest from the inside. The Bigfoot beings are our family now. We move with them through the secret spaces between trees, watching over our home. They taught us how to speak with the wind, how to sing to the seeds underground, how to heal broken branches with a touch. The forest is different too. The mist that never leaves now has a purpose. It hides our work from curious eyes. Those parts of the park that people used to damage are now protected by walls of thorns that appear overnight. Signs get mysteriously twisted around, leading people away from sacred grounds. Sometimes, late at night, hikers say they see strange lights between the trees. They hear whispers in voices that sound almost human. They feel eyes watching them, not threatening, just aware. A few weeks ago, I saw Foster again. He'd come back as a visitor, walking carefully on the marked trails. When he reached the edge of our territory, he stopped. He laid some flowers on the ground and said quietly, "I understand now, Mr. Thompson. I finally understand." I rustled the leaves above him in response. He smiled like he knew I was there. That's the thing about becoming part of the forest. You don't really lose yourself. You just become bigger. Your thoughts stretch out like roots, touching other thoughts. Your memories mix with memories that are thousands of years old. Your love for the forest grows until it's as big as the forest itself. People still come to Olympic National Park. They still hike the trails and take pictures of the big trees. But they feel something different now. Something ancient and alive. Something watching. If you ever visit, you might feel it too. A sense that the forest is more than just trees. A whisper in leaves that sounds almost like words. A shadow between the trunks that walks on two legs. If you do, remember my story. Remember to step carefully, speak softly, and show respect. Because now I am the forest's voice, its guardian, its memory, and I'm not the only one watching. The deep. Green has many secrets, and some of them walk on two legs, wear ranger badges, and remember what it was like to be human. But we're something else now, something necessary, something eternal, something green. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years as a park ranger at Mount Baker, but nothing like this. The morning I found those frozen deer standing perfectly still like ice statues in 70-degree weather, I knew something was terribly wrong. In my forest, let me back up a bit. My name's Bob Mitchell, and I've been watching over these woods for the past 15 years. October's usually chilly up here in Mount Baker National Forest, but this year was different. The thermometer outside my cabin hit 20 below zero last week, in early October. That's not just unusual, that's impossible. I remember standing on my porch that morning, coffee cup freezing in my hands, watching the birds flee south in huge black clouds. They were nearly 2 months early for migration. The animals knew something we didn't. Even the bears, who should have been busy fattening up for winter, were nowhere to be seen. Just empty woods and that biting, unnatural cold. But it wasn't just the weather that had me worried. A week ago, some college kids doing research in the caves near Pine Ridge found something that made my skin crawl. Ancient drawings on the cave. Walls, the kind our local Native American tribes left hundreds of years ago. I'd seen plenty of their artwork before, usually telling stories about hunting or showing maps of the land. But these were different. The pictures showed tall, skinny figures made of ice, towering over tiny human shapes. Next to them were warnings written in symbols I'd never seen before. The college kid's professor translated them. Beware the winter. Spirits, they hunger in the heights. I didn't think much of it then, just old stories, I told myself, but that was before the ice started appearing. It began with small things, patches of frost on tree trunks in the middle of warm afternoons. Then I started finding these weird ice patterns, like frozen snowflakes the size of dinner plates, growing up the sides of rocks and trees, perfect geometric shapes, like something you'd see under a microscope, but giant. When I touched them, they didn't melt. Even when the sun was beating down, they stayed frozen solid. I've lived through real winter, the kind that kills. Back in World War II, I lost my whole unit to the cold in the Battle of the Bulge. The ice I'm seeing here in Mount Baker, it reminds me of those days, the way it creeps up on you, the way it doesn't follow the rules of nature. Yesterday, 3 hikers went missing near the upper trails. Their families reported them overdue, but something in my gut told me this wasn't your typical rescue mission. I've pulled dozens of lost hikers out of these woods over the years. This felt different. As I write this in my logbook, the radio's crackling with static and the temperature's dropping again. The thermometer's needle is spinning down so fast I can hear it clicking. Outside my window, the trees are starting to crack and pop as the cold squeezes them like a giant fist. Something's happening in my forest, something that shouldn't be possible. And I think those ancient warnings on the cave walls weren't just stories after all. I'm going to find those missing hikers tomorrow morning. But first, I need to check my emergency gear and make sure my old silver flask is full. Something tells me I'm going to need more than just standard rescue equipment for this one. The sun's setting now, and the shadows between the trees look darker than usual, taller. And if I'm not imagining things, I swear I can hear something moving out there in the cold. Something big. Whatever's out there in the hungry heights of Mount Baker, I've got a feeling I'm about to find out what the Native Americans were trying to warn us about. And I'm not sure I'm going to like the answer. The morning light didn't help, much with the unease I was feeling. As I packed my rescue gear, my hands kept shaking, not from the cold, but from memories I thought I'd buried long ago. You see, cold weather and I have a history, a bad one. 30 years ago, I was just a young soldier in World War II, leading my unit through the frozen forests of Belgium. We called it the Battle of the Bulge, but for me, it was more like a battle against winter itself. The cold there was different. It wasn't just weather, it was like a living thing that hunted us. I remember the night I lost my men. The temperature had dropped so fast that our water canteens froze solid in minutes. One by one, my friends stopped shivering. That's when you know it's bad, when someone stops shivering. By morning, I was the only one left alive. The only thing that saved me was this silver flask of whiskey I keep with me even now. It kept my blood moving just enough to survive. The doctor said my lungs would never be the same after that night. They were right. Every winter since then, I feel that damage. Every cold breath reminds me of the friends I couldn't save. Maybe that's why I became a park ranger after the war. I thought if I could save enough lost hikers, maybe it would make up for the men I lost. My ex-wife Sarah used to say I cared more about saving strangers than fixing our marriage. Maybe she was right too. But standing here now, checking my rescue gear, something feels horribly familiar. The way the air feels heavy, like it's watching me. The strange quiet in the woods. It's bringing back memories I've spent years trying to forget. I double-check everything in my pack. Emergency flares, first aid kit, rope, extra warm clothes, my radio, and of course my flask. Some people might judge a park ranger for carrying whiskey, but they've never been in the kind of cold where it means the difference between life and death. Just then, my radio crackles to life. At first, it's just static, but then I hear something that makes my blood run cold. Through the noise, there's a voice speaking German, the same kind of military transmissions I used to hear during the war. But that's impossible. This is a basic rescue radio. It can't pick up signals from 30 years ago. I shake my head and check the radio again. Now it's just normal static. Great, I think to myself. Either I'm going crazy or something very strange is happening in my forest. Neither option sounds good. As I step outside my cabin, I notice something odd about my footprints in the frost. Behind them, new ice crystals are forming in perfect geometric patterns, like the ones I saw on the trees. They spread out like frozen lace, making shapes that remind me of military medals, the kind they gave us after Belgium. My watch says it's 8 a.m., but the shadows between the trees look like late evening shadows, too long, too dark. And is it my imagination? Or are they moving even when the branches are still? I take a deep breath, wincing at the familiar ache in my lungs. Focus, Mitchell, I tell myself. There are 3 missing hikers out there. Whatever's going on in these woods, whatever games my mind might be playing, those people need help. But as I start walking toward the trail where the hikers were last seen, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not just walking into a rescue mission. I'm walking into something else. Something that feels an awful lot like that night in Belgium, when the cold became a living thing that hunted us. I grip my flask a little tighter and keep walking. Behind me, the shadows seem to follow, stretching longer with each step I take. Peak hiker's last known location was near Eagle Ridge Trail. I'd walked this path hundreds of times before, but today everything looked different. The trees seemed taller, their branches reaching down like long dark fingers. Even the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, like breathing through a frozen cloth. That's when I heard someone calling my name. Bob. Hey, Bob Mitchell. I turned to see Frank Cooper jogging up the trail. Frank was a local hunter who knew these woods almost as well as I did. He was bundled up like it was the middle of winter, his breath making clouds in the weirdly cold air. Heard about the missing hikers on my radio, he said, catching his breath. Thought you might want an extra pair of eyes. I was glad to see him. Sometimes having another person around keeps your mind from playing tricks on you. We walked together, following the trail markers toward where the hikers had planned to camp. You notice anything strange lately, Frank? I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded slowly. Been finding deer frozen solid. Not dead from the cold and then frozen. I mean frozen while they were still standing. Never seen anything like it. My stomach tightened. So I wasn't the only one seeing impossible things. We found the hikers' campsite about an hour later. Everything was exactly where they'd left it. 3 tents, camping gear, even food still sitting out. But something was very wrong. The whole campsite was covered in a layer of ice, even though it had been warm yesterday. Look at this, Frank said, pointing to one of the tents. Inside, sleeping bags were still laid out, frozen stiff like they'd been dipped in liquid nitrogen. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on a camping table, the liquid frozen solid with ripples in it like it had frozen in seconds. They left in a hurry, I said, picking up a backpack. But why leave all their gear? That's when we found the journal. It was a small notebook, partially frozen to a log near the fire pit. I carefully peeled it free and opened it. The last entry was from 2 days ago, Day 2 at Eagle Ridge. Temperature keeps dropping for no reason. Kate swears she sees tall shadows moving in the snowfall, but there isn't any snow. This morning, we found weird footprints around the camp. Way too big to be human or bear. John wants to leave, but the rangers said this was the safest trail in the park. Something feels wrong. The cold isn't natural. When the wind blows, it sounds like the entry stopped mid-sentence. Frank and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to say what we were thinking. Suddenly, my radio crackled. Through the static, I heard something that made my heart stop. Sarah's voice, my ex-wife, calling for help. But Sarah was in Seattle, hundreds of miles away. Bob? Frank's voice was tense. Look at the ground. The frost around our feet was spreading, forming those same perfect geometric patterns I'd seen before. But now, they were growing faster, climbing up our boots. The temperature plummeted so quickly, our breath turned to ice crystals in the air. That's when we heard it, a sound like trees cracking in the cold, but deeper, almost like footsteps. Very, very big footsteps. Frank, I whispered, don't move. Through the trees ahead of us, something massive was moving, something that made the shadows bend the wrong way. The geometric ice patterns spread out from its footprints, growing like frozen lightning across the ground. My old war instincts kicked in. Frank, slowly back away. Don't run. But Frank was already turning, panic in his eyes. This isn't right, Bob. This isn't... He never finished that sentence, because right then we saw what was making those footsteps, and everything I thought I knew about what was possible in my forest changed forever. What we saw through the trees didn't make sense. My brain kept trying to tell me it wasn't real, but my eyes wouldn't lie to me. It was tall, taller than any creature I'd ever seen, at least 15 feet high, with skin that looked like thick, blue-white ice. Its arms were too long, hanging down past what should have been its knees, but worst of all was its face, if you could call it a face. It looked like a frozen skull with empty black holes for eyes and long icicles for teeth. Frank grabbed my arm. His hand was shaking. Bob, he whispered, What do we do? Before I could answer, the creature's head snapped toward us. Those black eye holes seemed to stare right through me, and suddenly I was back in Belgium, feeling that killing cold creeping into my bones. The thing moved, not like any animal I'd ever seen, more like ice spreading across a window. 1 second it was 30 feet away, the next it was only 10. The air around it was so cold, it hurt to breathe. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Frank toward the trail. We took off as fast as we could, crashing through the underbrush. Behind us, I heard that horrible cracking sound again, like breaking ice, but deeper, almost like laughter. The cold followed us. I could feel it catching up, making the sweat on my back turn to frost. Frank was ahead of me, running full speed, when he suddenly stopped. "Frank, come on!" I yelled. But he wasn't moving. He was staring at something in front of him, his breath coming out in terrified gasps. That's when I realized there was another one standing right in our path. This one was even bigger. The ice of its body was clearer, and inside I could see shapes. Human shapes, frozen and preserved, like insects in amber. With horror, I recognized the missing hikers. Frank turned to run the other way, but his legs were already starting to freeze. Ice was creeping up from the ground, covering his boots, his knees. "Mitchell!" he screamed. "Help me!" I reached for him, but the ice was spreading too fast. In seconds, it had reached his waist. His face was turning blue, his eyes wide with terror. "The flask," Frank gasped. "The whiskey, like in the war." My hands shaking, I pulled out my silver flask. But before I could reach Frank, the ice covered him completely. For one horrible moment, he was perfectly preserved, like a statue made of crystal. Then the ice contracted. Frank shattered into 1,000 red-tinted pieces. I heard that cracking laugh again, closer now. The creatures, were moving toward me. The air was so cold my lungs felt like they were filling with needles. Through the pain, I heard a new voice calling out, "Hello? Is someone there? I'm Dr. Helen Nash from the Weather Service." We picked up some strange readings. No, they were using voices to lure people in, just like they'd use Sarah's voice on the radio. These things, whatever they were, could mimic anyone they'd heard. I gripped my flask tighter and backed away slowly. My thoughts raced. The whiskey had saved me in Belgium because alcohol lowers the freezing point of blood. But would that be enough against creatures that could flash freeze a man solid? The ice patterns were spreading around me in a circle now, like a giant snowflake closing in. Above me, snow was starting to fall, but wrong. The snowflakes were falling up, swirling around the creatures like a reverse blizzard. I had to make a choice. Try to run, knowing they could move faster than any human, or stand and fight with nothing but a flask of whiskey against monsters made of living ice. That's when I remembered something about the cave drawings, about the winter spirits that hungered in the heights. The natives must have fought these things before. They must have found a way to survive. I just had to live long enough to figure out how. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, the cold air stabbing my chest with every breath. Behind me, those ice creatures were getting closer. I could feel the temperature dropping even as I moved. I needed a plan. Frank was gone, and those things were using people's voices to trick more victims into coming up here. I had to stop them before anyone else died. My radio crackled again. This time it was a child's voice. "Mommy, where are you? I'm so cold." I wanted to throw the radio away, but I couldn't. What if a real person needed help? What if the real Dr. Nash was out here somewhere? That's when I spotted something through the trees. A cave entrance. The same cave where they'd found those ancient warnings. Maybe there were more clues inside about how to fight these things. I ducked inside just as another wave of killing cold swept past. The cave was dark, but I had my flashlight. What I saw made my stomach turn. The walls weren't just covered in drawings. They were covered in ice. And in that ice I could see faces, dozens of faces, frozen in terror. Some looked hundreds of years old, preserved perfectly in the crystal clear ice. Others were newer. I recognized 3 of them, the missing hikers. My hands shaking, I moved, my flashlight across the cave walls, reading the pictographs. They showed the ice creatures, the winter spirits, hunting people. But there was more. One drawing showed people fighting back with fire. Another showed the spirits retreating from a great heat. "Of course," I whispered. "They're made of ice. They hate fire." A sound like breaking glass echoed through the cave. They were coming. I reached into my pack and pulled out my emergency flares. 3 of them. Not much, but maybe enough. I also had my lighter and my flask of whiskey. The temperature plunged again. At the cave entrance, one of the creatures appeared. It was the bigger one, the one with the hikers frozen inside it. Up close, I could see that its icy body was growing, larger with each victim it took. It was feeding on them, somehow using their frozen bodies to make itself stronger. "You're not getting anyone else," I said, my voice shaking from both cold and fear. The thing tilted its head, like it was curious. Then it spoke, using Frank's voice. "Mitchell, help me!" Anger burned through my fear. I pulled out my first flare, struck it, and threw it straight at the creature. The effect was instant. Where the flare hit, the ice began to melt and steam. The thing made a sound like 1,000 icicles breaking at once, a scream of pain. But my small victory didn't last long. The second creature appeared behind the first. The cave was getting colder by the second. Ice was creeping across the ground toward my feet. I lit another flare, but my fingers were so cold I could barely hold it. My breath was freezing in my lungs again, just like that night in Belgium. Black spots danced in my vision. The creatures were closing in. They knew I was getting weaker. The ice was up to my knees now, and I could feel it starting to burn. That's when I noticed something about the cave walls. They were covered in cracks, deep cracks that ran all the way up to the ceiling. And I remembered something from my mountain rescue training. Caves like this were often unstable. I had 1 flare left. And my flask. Maybe I couldn't kill these things, but maybe I could trap them. I just had to be willing to pay the price. My legs were almost completely frozen now, but my mind was clear. I had 1 chance to stop these things. To make Frank's death mean something. To save anyone else from becoming part of their frozen collection. The creatures moved closer, their icy bodies scraping against the cave walls. The bigger one reached for me with its long crystalline fingers. Behind it, I could still see the faces of the hikers trapped in its ice, their eyes wide with terror. "You want me?" I said, pulling out my last flare. "Come and get me." I struck the flare and threw it. Not at the creatures, but at the cave ceiling where the biggest crack was. At the same time, I unscrewed my flask and splashed the whiskey in an arc around me. The alcohol would help prevent my blood from freezing, just like it did in Belgium. But more importantly, it was flammable. The flare hit the ceiling and bounced, shooting sparks everywhere. Some of them landed in the whiskey. The cave lit up like daylight. The creatures screamed, that horrible sound of cracking ice, and backed away from the flames. But they weren't retreating fast enough. I needed more heat, more fire. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely do it, but I pulled out my lighter. The ice was up to my waist now. In a few seconds, I'd be just another frozen face in their collection. "This is for Frank," I whispered, and clicked the lighter. I threw it at the pool of burning whiskey. The flames exploded bigger, climbing up the cave walls. The heat was intense, and the creatures shrieked louder. The ice of their bodies began to melt and steam, but that wasn't my real plan. Above us, the cave ceiling cracked louder. The heat was making the rocks expand. Any second now, the bigger creature realized what was happening. It lunged at me, its icy claws reaching for my throat. The cold coming off it was so intense that my eyes started to freeze shut. That's when the ceiling gave way. Tons of rock and ice came crashing down. The creatures looked up, their black eye holes wide with what might have been fear. I smiled even though my face was nearly frozen. "Welcome to your tomb," I said. The cave collapsed. The last thing I saw was the creatures being crushed under the falling rocks, their icy bodies shattering. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was buried. Hours, maybe. The cold kept me alive, ironically. When the rescue team finally dug through the rubble, they found me barely breathing but alive. They said it was a miracle, that no one could survive being frozen like that. The doctors said the same thing when they treated my frostbite and my damaged lungs. But I know it wasn't a miracle that saved me. It was experience, knowledge, and maybe a little help from my old friend, the silver flask. The creatures were buried under tons of rock and ice. Their cave became their prison, or maybe their grave. We never found their bodies, but then again, how do you find the remains of something made of ice? The temperature in Mount Baker National Forest finally returned to normal. The animals came back, the strange ice patterns disappeared, but the area around that cave, it never thaws, not even in the hottest summer. And sometimes on very cold nights, people say they hear sounds coming from deep under the ground. Sounds like cracking ice and voices calling for help. I still work as a ranger here, still carry my flask. But now I carry a few extra flares too, just in case, because I know something that most people don't. The old stories, the ancient warnings, they're not just stories. And somewhere deep in the frozen heart of these mountains, those things might still be alive, waiting, hungry, and winter is coming. It's been 6 months since that night in the cave. Spring has come to Mount Baker, bringing warm sunshine and new leaves to the trees. But some things have changed forever. I still walk my usual trails, checking on hikers and keeping the forest safe. My lungs hurt more than they used to, and my hands get stiff in cold weather from the frostbite. The doctors say I'm lucky to have all my fingers. Frank's family held a memorial service for him. I couldn't tell them the whole truth about how he died. Who would believe it? Instead, I said he died trying to save others, which was true enough. They buried an empty coffin, since we never found his body. The ice had shattered him into too many pieces. The families of the missing hikers eventually stopped searching. Their backpacks and camping gear are stored in the ranger station's lost and found, waiting for someone to claim them. No one ever will. Dr. Helen Nash, the real one, did come to investigate the strange weather patterns. She found no scientific explanation for why the temperature had dropped so low in October. Her equipment picked up nothing unusual. The ice creatures left no evidence behind, except for the memories that keep me awake at night. The cave entrance is completely sealed now. The rangers put up warning signs about unstable ground, but I made sure they also added some extra fencing, just in case. I visit the site sometimes, especially when the weather turns cold. I bring my flask, still filled with whiskey, and some emergency flares. Call it paranoia if you want, but I've learned to trust my instincts. The local Native American tribes sent an elder to perform a ceremony at the cave. He didn't seem surprised when I told him what happened. He just nodded and said, "The old stories are always true in their own way." These days, I pay more attention to those old stories. I've started collecting them, writing them down in a notebook along with my own experience. Maybe someday someone else will need to know what I learned. That not all ice is natural, that some shadows are more than shadows, and that the most dangerous predators are the ones no one believes in. Yesterday, I noticed the first geese flying south. It's early for migration, 2 months early, just like last year. And this morning, my thermometer showed a strange reading, 20 degrees below zero, just for a second before returning to normal. I check my emergency pack more often now, keep my radio close, watch the shadows between the trees a little more, carefully, because deep down I know the truth. Those creatures aren't dead. You can't kill something that's as old as winter itself. They're just waiting, sleeping in their frozen tomb beneath the mountain. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows cold from the heights, I hear noises that sound like cracking ice, like something stirring deep underground, like ancient, Things beginning to wake up, but that's a story for another day. For now, I just do my job, keep people safe, watch the skies for early snow, and always, always carry matches.